Okay. Welcome to the Titusville Planning and Zoning Commission of September 20th, 2023. Would everybody stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please, Lori.
Chairman Richardson.
Here.
Vice Chairman Aton.
Here.
Secretary Grant.
Here.
Member Moscoso.
Here.
Member Garad. Member Faison.
Here.
Member Perez.
Here.
Alternate Member Childs.
Here.
Alternate Member Rogers. School Board Member Gilbert.
Here.
Okay, we do have a quorum. Next item is approval of minutes of August 16th. Have you had a chance to read the minutes?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to approve the minutes from August 16th, 2023.
Motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Roll call, please.
Member Faison.
Yes.
Secretary Grant.
Yes.
Member Perez.
Yes.
Member Moscoso.
Yes.
Vice Chairman Aton.
Yes.
Member Garad.
Yes.
Chairman Richardson.
Yes. Okay, the next item, quasi judicial confirmation procedures. You want to go over those, Chelsea?
Sure, absolutely. Hello, good evening, folks. Here remotely from upstate New York. The notice is all persons who anticipate speaking on any public hearing item must fill out an oath card to be heard on that agenda item and sign the oath contained thereon. These cards are located on the table near the entrance to the council chamber or may be obtained from the recording secretary. This meeting will be conducted in accordance to the procedures adopted in Resolution number 24-1997. Those speaking in favor of a request will be heard first, those opposed will be heard second, and those who wish to make a public comment on the item will speak third. The applicant may make a brief rebuttal if necessary. A representative from either side, for or against, may cross-examine a witness. Anyone who speaks is considered a witness. If you have photographs, sketches, or documents that you desire for the commission to consider, they must be submitted into evidence and will be retained by the city. Please submit such exhibits to the recording secretary. Thank you.
Thank you. There is no consent agenda. And before we go any further, I reckon we have a lot of people for citizens to be heard. Am I correct? Would you raise your hand if your item is not on the agenda? Does the commission want to move citizens to be heard to the front of the agenda rather than the back of the agenda?
Yes.
Anyone care to make a motion?
I make a motion that they be moved forward
Is there
in
a
the
second?
agenda.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Any discussion? Roll call vote.
Member Garad.
Yes.
Vice Chairman Aton.
Yes.
Member Perez.
Yes.
Member Moscoso.
Yes.
Secretary Grant.
Yes.
Member Faison.
Yes.
Chairman Richardson.
Yes. Okay, the next item will be item 10, petitions and requests from the public present. I know that man.
Hello, sir. I'm short one.
And of course, you have 3 minutes. If you wish to extend, you've got to tell me, and the commission will decide if you get an extra few minutes.
For the record, my name is Dwight Severs, a resident of Titusville. My family has owned a parcel of property on Georgia Avenue off of O'Dixie for more than 40 years. I recently became aware of a proposed development of 13.27 acres the Titusville ALF Assisted Living Facility, which proposes to connect the development from US 1 and Silver Star Road to Georgia Avenue. Georgia Avenue is a single-family residential street, and it would go right past my property. There are many people living on Georgia Avenue of all ages. Directly across the street from me are very young children living there. The proposed development is currently under review by the city staff, which ultimately will lead to the issuance of a development order, I assume, to proceed with the development. No rezoning is required, no comprehensive plan changes are necessary. Generally speaking, the use is appropriate in HM, and as you will see from the first map I've handed to you, you will see the HM on there, and you see a line going through an R1C subdivision, which is Georgia Avenue, all the way over to US 1. The second map shows the proposed master site plan. Again, at the top left-hand corner is Georgia Avenue connecting to the single-family subdivision, and the street going through the development, again, up to Silver Star Road and US 1. Why am I here? Section 3131 of the LDRs, Exhibit 3, I have given to you. Part of your duties and powers as a Planning and Zoning Commission, subsection C, before any new street is opened or any existing street extended, widened, relocated, closed, or vacated, or corrected within the corporate limits, the person opening such street or proposed such new subdivision, etc., for business, shall submit a detailed plan with blueprints and other necessary data to the commission. It's you. The commission reviews and makes a recommendation to City Council. The proposed extension of Georgia Avenue from the Titusville ALF to Silver Star Road or vice versa in US 1 is submitted, has not been submitted to you in the council as required by the code. On August the 22nd, I communicated with Mr. Parrish, who's certainly here, about this and the connection to Georgia Avenue.
Do you need extra time?
If I could,
How many minutes?
2 to 3 minutes.
Anyone care to make a motion?
I make a motion that we allow the 2 or 3 minutes
Is there a
necessary.
second?
Yeah, I'll second.
All in favor? Aye. Okay, go ahead, proceed.
The project, he indicated the project is still in review. We can certainly propose limiting the second entrance to an emergency only. It could be gated access for employees and residents. I have no objection to there being emergency only vehicle access, but not to everyone else. This is a single family subdivision. And as you will note, in an HM subdivision, or development is supposed to be on an arterial. And I cite the section of the code is 28-311. Again, we have no objection, I don't have an objection to the emergency only access. I have seen the staff review by this. It's gone through 2 cycles, and I see the letter from the city staff of February 7th, 2023 and June 21st, 23. There was no limitations being placed upon the access to Georgia Avenue. And you'll see none on the master plan. There's no comment along that line by staff. This particular piece of property was previously submitted for a multifamily development a few years ago. You, the commission, voted against it, and part of the reason was Georgia Avenue. And I see this not any different. To the extent staff may say this is a driveway, it does not meet the definition of driveway, which is a private vehicle access to provide access to a parking space, garage, carport, just look at the map or diagram. It's just road without any limitations thus far, and that's what we're concerned about. To my knowledge, there's no code provision that requires a minimum of 2 accesses for this ALF. There are 97 units. If it was a single-family subdivision of 101 units or more, then you would have that issue arise. But that's not what this is. So we would respectfully suggest to you to agree with us that this issue should come before you, because that's part of your duties and responsibilities. And we'll address further whether or not it's appropriate. Thank you.
Any questions of Mr. Severs? Member Faison.
Good evening, Mr. Stevens. How are you doing?
Okay.
Hey, thank you for coming before us today.
Yes, sir.
Question. So, did you take this to staff? This
I've had
staff?
communications with staff about this, and I've given you a copy of the response,
Okay.
which is Exhibit 4.
Alrighty. Let's go. I don't have my glasses on, so please bear with me.
That's all right.
Try to read this. So, just in brief, what did staff reply? Oh, here it is, right here. Copy. So, Mr. Parrish provided you with.
The possibility of limiting it to emergency and then going on to say, and limiting to employees and residents who live there.
Okay.
So that very well could be to all the residents there. And where if they want to go to a grocery store, for example, they would probably go up to the Winn-Dixie store. They would go through Georgia Avenue and go there.
Okay. All right.
And this is a business development which is designed or intended to be on an arterial, not on Georgia Avenue, not a local street. That's what Georgia Avenue is, a local street.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Any other questions?
I have a question, Mr. Chairman. For Brad, in this citation that a development of this caliber has to be on an arterial highway, is that a correct statement? The first question. And the second one is the opinion then that US 1 being an arterial highway, that the property's on an arterial highway even though it has to go over the railroad tracks to get there?
Yes, and there is not a railroad track. There is a regional trail.
Yeah, I'm trying to get my site geometry. This isn't on the west side of the railroad tracks.
That bicycle path.
Yeah, the bike path now. Former
Correct. It historically was a railroad
Correct.
track, but it's rails
It's
to
the bike-
trails.
bike-
It's now a trail.
But the condition is that that's abutting through the bike path, the arterial highway, so it's compliant with that road.
We see, that's how we see it.
Yeah.
I do have some new information to share about this. I received a response by email from the engineer of record, Jennifer Wilson, on this project yesterday. She stated that she wanted to let us know that their client has agreed to an EMS access only to Georgia Avenue, and that they will show that as a gate and Knox box on their next submittal to us. So I just only received that yesterday. So they'll show that on their response to comments, our most recent comments and revisions to the plans that they have to submit to us.
So maybe our problem solved. As long as it's emergency access only, we understand. I mean, I can't speak for all the residents, but, and we have no objection to there being an assisted living facility there. It's appropriate. There may be some other issues that have to be addressed, but.
We're all going to need them eventually.
Yes, sir.
Member Aton.
Do we know, or you know, is this a, whatever kind of card there is, or whatever kind of access controller is it card in and card out? Because I've got personal.
I haven't seen anything about limitation on the access other than the drawing showing.
Because I've got personal experience from years ago. We owned Missileview Mobile Home Park, which is 2 parcels away. For a brief period of time, Buffalo Road connected through to Mayfair Way. And if there's no traffic control on the US 1 side, people will start cutting through there. If all you have to do is pull up to the gate, it opens and lets them out on that direction. So, important note to make sure it's controlled from both sides.
And that was exactly one of the concerns we had on the apartment complex. Because people would use it as a cut-through. If somebody wanted to leave that complex and go to I-95, they would cut through, go through Dixie, Airport Road, Garden Street, and go that way rather than going all the way around.
Member Moscoso.
I think you presented this really well, and it's very clear. My question to Brad is, I know for an R3, if you have over 101 units, you need to have 2 points of entrance. For an assisted living, is it necessary to have 2 points of entrance on Georgia Avenue and US 1, or is only one entrance acceptable?
I take some time to look to see what the code specifically says about this. This is being reviewed by our site review team right now. They did propose initially to try and have a second access going over the trail on the north part of this property. We objected to that because we're trying to limit as many driveways going over the trail as much as possible. They're utilizing Silver Star Road, which empties out to a light there. So they're going to the south part of the property and then going to that light. That's their main entrance. They have a right to ask for a secondary entrance. Decided to do it there at Georgia. And like I said, per their email yesterday that I received yesterday, they're going to restrict it to only EMS access only.
I mean, but if our code doesn't comply with that, why is that even being considered as an option?
I didn't say whether the code complies or not, or whether this complies with that particular code section or not. I'd have to take a look to see exactly what is, look at this plan. I have not been part of the detailed review of this particular plan myself. I just know that what I shared with Mr. Sievers in an email were the comments and code sections that were referenced in the comment letters that the staff site plan review team provided to the engineer of record. And I just included the reference to the sections that they utilized as part of their review. I did not go back to fact check whether that was correct or not. This is still under review.
Member Rogers.
Mr. Parrish, did you say they said a Knox box? And what is exactly a Knox box?
So according to the fire department, their response to the applicant after we received that email yesterday, they described it as a gate would need to include a keypad for entry code, a Knox box, key switch, which is an order key switch, and an SOS siren operated system that activates gate opener upon activation of emergency vehicle siren. And the gates need to open to fully open position in the event of a power failure. And the fire marshal referenced a particular section of the life safety code. So basically, it is a key that's in a special box that allows the emergency personnel to be able to access that gate.
So when an ambulance or a fire truck pulls up, there's some kind of like an RFID type thing that kind of, they communicate and pops open? Or I guess what I'm saying is a Knox box specific to emergency vehicles only, or is it simply a keypad that anybody can come and go with?
So it's more of a redundancy system from what I'm seeing in this email. So you have an electrical system there, a keypad. If that doesn't work, then you have the key to be able to use to physically get to the gate.
Okay, but it's not specifically designed to be a simple entry and exit automatic gate or power gate or for anybody who wants to come and go, or can it be used that way if somebody decides they want to?
If the applicant decides to do that, it's possible. But the email that I received yesterday stated they are going to restrict the access to EMS only.
Okay, and that can be agreed and set in stone, and
We will when
not
they
change later, I guess.
Well, if it's approved that way with the site plan, then it's a condition of the site plan. It must adhere to it. But we'll see what they're really proposing when we receive the resubmittal.
Well, I did want to just, as a comment, echo what Ms. Moscoso said. I do feel, Mr. Sievers, that you have come here very well prepared. You've been polite, and I think your request is reasonable. And I wish more people came to us like you have come today.
Member Garrett.
A couple of more questions for Mr. Parrish, if you can help me. With respect to the question that remains as to whether the number of units in this by code are warrant a second access, and the second access being sufficient for fire EMS, perhaps by interpretation, with a lockbox, sounds like Mr. Seaver's concerns are eliminated. The plan that would be examined by that goes through the technical staff, but as Mr. Seaver's indicated, and then that's the question one, does that plan have to come back to the P&Z board as he submits or not?
We don't believe so, no.
Okay.
It's not, I think there was a statement that the road was extending. That's not the case. We believe, as Mr. Seaver has already stated, staff's interpretation that this is mainly a private drive on a private property. So they're just connecting to an adjacent public right-of-way. So we do not believe it needs to come back to the commission.
I understand your response. And the second question is, in the preference not to cross the bicycle path, aforementioned right-of-way for the railroad, I'm sorry, I made that mistake, the consideration to do that measured against the code that would require two entrances that would require the connection to Georgia, if that's the right street, is that something that gets deliberated by staff only? And what I'm concerned with is where you're measuring the public safety concern of two accesses to a number of dwelling units in a code to a preference, we not cross the bicycle way. In my riding the bicycle path in that area, there's quite a lot of crossings that exist, and I certainly appreciate not having more crossings when you don't have to. But it would seem to me it's at a point where you're at a consideration of, I may have to take a second access point to satisfy the code. And so my third question, part B, is how will we communicate those decision makings to the public? Will someone reach out to Mr. Savers and say, this is what we're doing now. We're going to get a second access point, but we're going to cross the bicycle path to do it and align it with US 1, as opposed to, we're not going to do that. We're going to have a lockbox. You mentioned, Mr. Severs, you were satisfied that that was sufficient to remove the concerns.
As far as I'm concerned, others may have.
Yes, I
understand
what the lockbox is, so I
Yes, sir.
appreciate that. Is that something you would share with them, or how was that consideration to be done?
We don't have a system of sharing that since this is an administrative process. Now, what the applicant is suggesting in their email is just what they're suggesting. We haven't seen what they're actually proposing because they were received it. So we can't, staff's not committing to anything to say this is a good idea or not. This is something that they are suggesting.
But if the question from the discussion is one where they will put a lockbox, if a further review by the administrative staff warrants a second access point, would they then defer to the full accessibility as opposed to a lockbox, or would they defer to the choice between the lesser of two, having access to US 1 as a second point of access?
It really depends. If you look on Exhibit 5, the last page that Mr. Savers distributed here, that's a reference to the code related to ALFs, assisted living facilities. He's got here highlighted in B, we have to consider the circulation pattern and make sure that it's safe and appropriate. So, as you know, you're looking at each of these properties and each of these developments, we have to weigh the pros and cons through the administrative process to see what is appropriate and what is safe. So if, in this case, they're not able, or we don't support an access point, a second access point going over an existing regional trail, and they have the option to provide that secondary access somewhere else that is available, that's something they should consider. That's what the applicants considered here, and that's what they proposed here in this plan.
I think that's the crux of my questions, that in an administrative matter, there'll be a determination made, and then construction occurs, and what leaves is a lockbox, and what comes is full access to Georgia Avenue. Because a decision's met that we don't want to cross the bikeway, we'd rather have access onto Georgia. And how do you interface with those concerns?
I'm not understanding, because if you have an approved site plan with something that says that they're going to only have the secondary access as EMS access only, that runs with that site plan.
Then if the answer is that's what they're committed to and that's all that it'll be, then you don't need the secondary access per se. And it's only supposition when you asked the question earlier about what level does the development require two access points. And then that was my question, is a second access point for emergency vehicles only satisfy that need? Myself, I would think so.
Again, I'd have to look at the code, look at this plan, see what exactly, how many access points they're specifically required to have. If they're exceeding a maximum, I'm not sure. I'd have to look at that and speak with our site plan review team. I wasn't expecting this discussion this evening.
Sure.
So I'm not prepared to answer that question.
So perhaps maybe that's something, as you look into it, could you come back and let us know what comes about at the end of the day, for example? Meaning that the site plan's approved with the lockbox satisfies.
We can tell you, yeah, I can report back to the commission to tell you when this plan is approved, what was approved, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah, just for,
Okay.
for my purpose, to understand how that flows from conceptual to site plan to construction plan to implementation. Thank you.
Member Moscoso.
Yeah, so I think none of us were expecting to. This is my first read on this, but I don't feel like we get to just pick and choose which codes we follow. And for me, having that second access, I mean, this is my first time looking at it. If it's not in our code, that would be something that the developer would need to look at and need to find another access that would not go through Georgia Avenue. I think by playing with it, we are setting a precedent for future developments, and that's something we need to be careful. Do we allow this or do we not allow this? And so those are just my thoughts, but I would agree with you that I think these issues are important, and I would love to see it come before Planning and Zoning and City Council. Now, I don't know how we get there, but those are my thoughts on it.
Member Rogers.
Issues concerning the bike path are near and dear to my heart, and I would just simply weigh in with, I certainly agree with what Mr. Parrish has said to limit the number of crossings. However, in the interest possibly of not routing additional traffic through a neighborhood that really wasn't designed for it, I will say that it doesn't bother me so much as a cyclist to have a crossing spot that I know that I can kind of ignore because it's only used as an emergency, kind of gateway, and the only time it's going to be used is by big vehicles with flashing lights, so I will see them and I don't have to worry about, like getting blindsided. So I suppose that, one might make an exception for such a thing and have two crossings over the bike path to avoid going down Georgia. And again, this is all hypothetical, and of course, Mr. Parrish knows the whys and wherefores of all this better than I do, or ever will. But I would just say, if there is an emergency, or if there's a precedent or an acceptance of the value of an emergency-only crossing or exit, second exit, then to me, it's not as big a problem if it's only used for that purpose to go across the bike path again. That's my comment.
I received, and I assume the commission did too, an email from Laureen Flanagan expressing her opinion on using Georgia Avenue as an entrance and exit. Anything more from Mr. Severs?
Not from me. I think someone else would like to speak
Yeah.
concerning another concern.
Anyone else? We've got all these celebrities here.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. I appreciate you being here and serving the community and listening to us. I live at 2210 Georgia Avenue, which is at the corner of Tennessee and Georgia, which is the intersection that is proposed for this extension. I've lived there for 40 years, so I have a little bit of skin in the game here. With what Mr. Severs has talked about, I agree, and what I heard Mr. Parrish say about the EMS-only knockbox, I think that could be a possible acceptable way of doing it. So I don't want to belabor the point there, but there is one other thing I'd like to talk about is the plans that I was provided have notes in there saying that Georgia Avenue will be the construction entrance for the entire project. And I have a problem with all those concrete trucks, all the, everything to build the facility coming through this construction entrance. That's my biggest concern past the Knox box issue, which I considerably helps me out.
Brad, do you have any comment on using Georgia Avenue as a construction
Mr. Swank mentioned that to me right before this meeting, and I wasn't aware of that. So that's, again, something I'd have to investigate to see where this construction entrance is. They may be using both entrances for different purposes to do the construction on this property, or proposing that at least. Again, the site plan is still in review.
And particularly on the site plan that was provided by the city, it does, on that plan, designate that as a construction entrance. So,
And they committed to use Georgia Avenue only as an EMS ingress and egress.
Well, what he's referring to is the construction
I
stage. Okay.
so I pretty much said what I'd like to say. Do you have any questions of me?
Any questions? And by the way, this is former Mayor Swank.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you.
Anyone else?
My name is Kay St. Ange. I live on Maryland Avenue in Grove Park, and I want to speak about the Titusville Assisted Living as well. I don't feel like I'm very happy to hear that the engineer has said that they would restrict it to emergency vehicles onto Georgia Avenue, but I still don't quite feel that it's set in stone yet. I agree with Ms. Masaka. I believe that this should be heard before P&Z. We're talking about a lot of different options here, and we don't yet know what's going to go forward. And I would think that P&Z would want to study it further. You've just been given this information, haven't had a chance to study it. And I believe it is an extension of Georgia Avenue. I don't consider this a driveway, as Mr. Dwight Seaver said. So the Land Development Regulation, Section 2872, you were given that indicates that traffic circulation of any proposed assisted living facility shall not negatively impact adjacent uses. Well, Grove Park is an adjacent use, and the code goes on to say the applicant must clearly demonstrate that the assisted living facility will be compatible with the neighborhood, particularly with regard to traffic circulation. So if this is traffic is allowed during construction to go through, and then maybe after construction, then they put an emergency gate there, well, that's certainly not what we're interested in having. We don't want construction vehicles going through. So I just see all these different scenarios, and I think that merits P&Z studying this further. If the site plan is approved, allowing access onto Georgia Avenue, not only construction vehicles, but delivery trucks will go forward, and all kinds of traffic will cut through. You know they will. And so I just don't want to see, actually, emergency vehicles alone is significant because they're going full speed ahead with sirens blaring. We got little kids playing basketball on the street, and here comes this big fire truck. So that is a concession that we're willing to make because we don't want the place to burn down. If it burns, and we're likely to burn, we're all for an assisted living. It's one story. It's 92 beds. They're going to save 3 huge 50-inch trees and a multitude of smaller trees. That's probably the best plan we can see going forward for this strip of 13 acres. And so we're not opposed to it. We just want you to be thoughtful about the traffic going through Grove Park. We only have 2 accesses onto Grove Park. We like the way Grove Park is right now. It's quiet with our little accesses onto Old Dixie. And so we just want you to consider this carefully. And I would ask that you follow Section 3131 and examine this, be allowed to examine this more carefully. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. St. Ange.
Did you have any questions? Okay.
I do have a question. Sorry, can you read, what does Section 3131 say? Do you have that?
Okay, yes, I have that here with me. You were also given it, but I happen to have it right here. The part that pertains to this says, before any new street is opened or any existing street extended, widened, relocated, closed, or vacated, or corrected within the corporate limits or planning jurisdiction of the city, or before any new subdivision within the corporate limits of the city for residences, business, or industrial uses, this is a business, is made, the person opening such street or proposing such new subdivision for residence, business, or industrial purposes shall submit a detailed plan with blueprints and other necessary data to the Planning and Zoning Commission. It shall be the duty of the commission to examine carefully the plans for such subdivision as regards their nature and purpose, the number, width, character, and location of streets and alleys, and the size, material, and manner of laying of water and sewer lines, and shall transmit such application with all data to the city council with its recommendations in writing. And then section 2872 applies just to assisted living, and it says that the applicant must clearly demonstrate that the traffic circulation won't adversely affect adjacent properties. So, thank you.
Secretary Grant.
Yes.
This is temporary, you know that, right?
What's temporary?
This EMS entrance is just, if they open it for construction, that's only temporary until the construction is finished, and then they can.
That's not how I understand it. If it's put on the site plan, it would be permanent. Brad might need to want to answer that.
The construction is a temporary entrance, if that's what they're proposing, and if that's how it's approved. But once construction is complete, if the Knox box and gate is that's something that's proposed and approved with the site plan, then that becomes permanent.
That's what I'm asking.
Yeah.
It's just temporary.
The construction, the use of Georgia Avenue for construction would be temporary, is what you're saying.
Right.
But then once it gets built, you would say they would have the emergency gate, and that would be permanent.
But no one else.
Only for emergency vehicles. But I don't really want construction trucks going through Georgia Avenue.
I was just looking for a compromise, that's all.
Right. A compromise is the emergency gate, the electronic gate for emergency. But I'm not inclined, and a number of people are here today, and many others as well wrote to Brad Parrish explaining their concerns and asking that an electronic gate be installed for emergency vehicles only. So our neighborhood has been rallying behind this issue and are very concerned, and not everybody can come, but a few did come, but others as well wrote to Brad Parrish expressing their concern. So we are very concerned about this. I do not believe anybody wants construction vehicles there. We're more than willing to allow an electronic gate for emergency vehicles, and that's what we're inclined to see happen.
Member Faison.
This is for staff. Brad, what is the proposed address of this facility? This goes to whether that's a street or a driveway. So the residents are concerned that this is a street, an extension of a street, but if the address is US 1, then this cannot be a street. This has to be their driveway. So the question is, what is the address of the facility?
The address, actually, there isn't one right now. We're working on that with Brevard 911 because it is a vacant piece of property.
Okay.
So we're getting a master address for the property, and most likely it's going to be either off of US 1, which I'd imagine is what the applicant's going to want, or it could be off of Silver Star.
Okay.
That's most likely where it's going to end up being based on what Brevard 911 tells us.
Okay. Thank you.
However, Georgia Avenue stops at the property line.
Exactly. So that's my point. So because Georgia Avenue stops at the property line, then this becomes a driveway from US 1 to Georgia Avenue, which is thereby not an extension of Georgia Avenue, which is what Brad Parrish has been saying all along, that this is an extension, this is just simply the driveway connecting one to the other. So unless that facility is addressed, Georgia Avenue, then it's not a road. Then it's not Georgia. It's not Georgia. Okay, so it's going to be addressed from where the driveway starts from. So then it'll be a driveway from, let's say, US 1. From US 1 to Georgia Avenue is a driveway, not a road.
I see it differently. I see it as a driveway onto Silver Star because that road's already there. They're not expanding the road or anything, but Georgia Avenue stops. It does not go, there is no
I'm agreeing with
It's woods there, okay? And they're going to have to cut down all the woods in order to make this driveway, what you call a driveway, what I call an extension of the road, because Georgia Avenue has already stopped before it gets to that property. So there's no way you can put a driveway because the road doesn't exist.
Correct.
So you have to extend the road, therefore you get to study it. I want you to be able to study this. It shouldn't just be thrown at you tonight. It shouldn't be just staff decision. It should be your decision, and it should be council's decision. I think, and the people have expressed their opinion, and I would just think it's a bigger issue than just for staff to determine. I think that you need to study this and give your recommendations to council as an advisory board. That's just my thoughts. I want to give you that ability to study this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One question I have is, what classification is Silver Star?
I do not believe it's considered to be an arterial or collector, but it does provide a means of main access for this property without having to create another cross over the trail.
Anyone else?
I would like, on a different issue, so I wanted to give
Okay.
some time.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. My name is Dr. Kathleen O'Rourke, and I live on Palmer Drive. And I'm going to tell you just a little bit about myself because it's relevant. I have a PhD in epidemiology, and before I retired, I was the department chair of the Epidemiology and Biostatistics Department at the University of South Florida College of Public Health. So I'm telling you that because I want you to know that I have experience in designing surveys, administering surveys, analyzing data. So one of the things that I have been feeling rather frustrated about is it's hard to get knowledge of citizens' opinions because to reach them is difficult. So what we did is we conducted a survey of a random sample of voters in Titusville, and it was a web-based survey and asking about their feelings about growth and development, and I really wanted to share that with you. So that was my purpose. And I'll go as quickly as I can. We had 680 respondents, so it's a fair number, and it's not just people from one subdivision. It's across Titusville. And what we asked them is what level of growth they wanted to see in Titusville in the next 10 years. And most people wanted some growth, but the most commonly requested was a small increase, followed by moderate. What they did not want is a large increase in growth. We also asked what type of housing residents wanted. The vast majority wanted to see new growth being single-family homes, and the least popular was high-density apartment buildings. We then also asked them questions about concerns about the effect of growth on different issues within the city, and it was really very striking because most residents were very concerned about the effect of this growth and development that we were having. 62% of the residents were worried about the effect of development on the water supply. 73% were very worried about the effect of development on drainage and sewers. 54% were very worried about the effect of development on the schools. 55% were very worried about the effect of development on access to emergency services. 73% of the residents, this is the highest one, were very worried about the effect of this development, these type of developments on traffic. And 65% of residents said, overall, they were very worried about the effect of development on just the quality of life. I'm not going to give you, I want to mention one thing because it was so striking to me. I've never done a survey before where I've gotten as many comments. I have like 61 pages of comments from people when I gave out this survey. That has never happened. I'm running out of time, but I'll go very, very quickly if I can. We asked some specific...
Your time is about to expire. Do you need another minute?
If I could have maybe 2 minutes.
Make a motion to give her another couple of minutes.
Okay.
I think I can do it in 2. I'm from Massachusetts. We talk fast.
I'll second.
I second.
Okay.
All in favor?
So, I'm sorry. Ready? Okay, so we asked the respondents how they felt about changing existing recreational and open space zoning to allow for building of high-density housing in Titusville. And this was just amazing. 96% were opposed to this. And 45% said in existing neighborhoods, and 51% said in all cases. So there was very little support for this type of development. We also asked about how important it was to limit development in areas that provide stormwater drainage and that to prevent flooding. And that showed a similar result. 98% considered limiting this type of development as a really important issue. They don't want additional flooding resulting from these developments. And I will say they thanked us for asking their opinion. And I have this for you, which I'll give to you and you can give out. And if we can enter it into the record for tonight, it's just the results of this survey. And I'm happy to answer any questions if you might have.
Are you going to present the survey to city council?
I did already in 3 minutes. And I also had met with the mayor, so I provided him that information. But I felt like for your committee, this is really important information to have because it's hard for citizens to be able to express their opinions because coming here is difficult for many people. But this way, we reached out and asked them for that.
Any member facing?
Yes.
Wait a minute.
Well,
Member facing was first.
I have tons of questions.
Okay.
Okay. So, thank you for doing that survey.
You're
number
welcome.
one. And so did you fund the survey as well?
Did I fund it? Yes,
Yes.
it's all self-funded, which means basically it was done on a shoestring.
Okay, all right, outstanding. So I don't know all of the questions that you asked, but here are just some quick notes that I asked myself as you were presenting, right? So the first question was based on demographics of those who answered your survey.
And it's in here, but on time, I skipped it. I can answer that to you because I did ask that because I thought it was an important question. Pretty even on where gender is in the city. I did limit this study to people age 18 and older, so it's going to skew a little older anyhow because we don't ask people under 18. They can't really consent to do this. So probably they were a little bit older than the average. We did pretty well at reaching Hispanics, which I was really pleased with. The lowest one that I was concerned was the African-American population. We only had a small number of people answer. I would love, if I had more money and could do these things, to go out and get more information. We also asked them, most of the people had completed high school. So you probably didn't pick up people who hadn't completed high school, but then again, we had people over the age of high school. Some had some college. So I think it's probably a little higher educated. 89% owned their home, and most people lived in a single family, although we had 7% who lived in duplexes and 7% who lived in high-density apartments.
So there is my first, not necessarily concern, but question, right? Is that if 89% of the folks who answered are already homeowners,
correct,
then the majority of those are probably not going to want high density. They want to continue for that because at this time, they have no need for high density. So if they don't see a need for themselves, then they don't want that for others. So I have a concern with that, just me personally, right?
No, that's a good concern. I will say, we had, which I just had, and I'll give you some of this because it's written in here. We had some comments about affordable housing. And people, I would say, were very aware of the need and wanted affordable housing, but they wanted it done in a way that was not these high-density apartments consistently.
So that's an issue, right? Is that affordable housing costs money.
Yep.
And to build single-family affordable housing right now, it's many people that own homes. I don't know if they go onto Realtor.com to find out what house prices are right now. It's insane.
Yep.
It is insane. And so, because I am a huge proponent of affordable housing, all right, and I know how much it costs for homes right now. You know, many folks currently that bought their homes bought them when they were $150,000 or below. Now, understand that same house today is selling for $320,000, $400,000. That same house that they bought at $150,000 or below is selling for $400,000. So when they say, well, we don't want high density, but unfortunately there are folks that are trying to get out of a shoebox. High density sometimes becomes the only way to make that happen.
I can see that, and I'll share my opinions because I'm actually very in favor of affordable housing. That isn't an issue for me personally. But I will say that even meeting the codes, the quality of the type of things that are built by out-of-state developers that come in here are the bare minimum, and they're not meeting the needs of the people they're providing this to. They're really not. And they're the ones that then when you have these really large corporations come in, they're effectively able to set prices for the future because they are owning such a majority of the housing. So there are other downsides to it that I'm concerned about, honestly.
No, I completely agree. So
Yeah.
I am totally in favor of locally built, locally owned.
Absolutely.
Let's build for our local populace, not for those who are wishing to come. I read an article the other day, and again, I'm gonna get off this soapbox, but I read an article the other day that says that we have more more property available for the 80% than we have for the 80% to occupy. Whereas below the 80%, we need property for them. We only have 1% to 2% to house those individuals. So meaning that if you're 80% or above the AMI of the area, there's more property for you available for you than folks that are 60% below the AMI. There's only 2 to 5% properties available for them. And yet those who sit at home every day, that have a nice home, that lives in their own home, they are against helping the people that are 60% below the AMI. I'm off the soapbox, but thank you for your survey. I would love to look at more of that.
Sure. And if you want to reach me anytime.
To reach other folks, to get more respondents,
we'd be
I will
happy to
definitely
do
do the
so.
best that I can to help you out.
Yeah, when we started, what we had hoped to do were use the emails that were available from the water department. And because of the fact that they were concerned about privacy issues, although the city actually was responsible for constructing that database in a way to protect the privacy of, for example, police and firefighters, because that did not happen, they have not given us that data and made no movement to help us, which would have given us a wider range of people than registered voters who, again, are more likely to be educated, they're more likely to be Caucasian probably. I mean, it's just the data we had. We would have loved to have used that. And if you can find a way to help us break that barrier, that would be really helpful.
Member Childs.
Yeah, I watched you on YouTube give the report to City Council, and so the next day I asked the city clerk to send me a copy of the report, and I read it, and really appreciate you doing that. And I actually shared it to some other advocates in the community too, so they could have an option of looking at it. And I think it's definitely eye opening. I think it's something that a lot of people have already noticed and have voiced concerns on, but it's nice to have some data on it, and I think it's something that I think we're all going to kind of keep in mind to move forward. So thank you for that.
And I appreciate it. I mean, these are my skills. This is what I know how to do. I did it. This was a big volunteer effort. My partner is an expert at internet and setting up websites and doing these surveys. So he did that part. I wrote the survey. This is a family affair. All my kids ended up going into public health. I had my son help me clean the database because I couldn't get access to a program I needed. This was really very shoestring, but it was very exciting to do it. And I tried, and you'll see the copies of the questions. I didn't try to lead people. I really wanted to know what they thought. And I agree, you're limited by who answers it. And I'm from public health. Listen, if anybody believes in getting out to the community and asking their opinions, that's what we would love to do.
Member Rogers.
I want to say thank you again, as others have said. I do think that it might be nice in the future, as Mr. Faison has mentioned, if you could blend in, get some more data that was a little more socioeconomically diverse and kind of, and blend it in if you can. I don't know quite whether that's legit to do with a study. I know nothing about studies. But I was just going to say for myself, I'd love to have a copy of it.
I have copies for everybody, but I find if I give them out ahead of time, you're so busy trying to find where I am, you don't hear what I'm saying. So I have them for you as it is.
I think maybe everybody might like to have a copy, but I
Sure.
would.
No, I have copies for everybody here, and I've given them out before, so you can have those shortly.
Member Perez.
Dr. O'Rourke, I'd like to commend you.
Thank you.
I mean, for you to take this on. What a service. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much.
And I hope you can continue.
I really like this.
I hope the council gave you the time that you needed to really say what you needed to say, because, it's not every day something like this falls on your lap, that you can actually take it and then grow it and to extend it and ask the questions that weren't asked and maybe get them to give you the information that they should have given to you in the first place. So that this could have been a top notch, which it was anyway, but.
Well, it was a labor of love, for sure.
Thank you.
So you're welcome.
Member Garrard.
I had two questions. I may not have understood you when you first introduced yourself. You're not associated with the neighborhood's concern on George Avenue. This is just
No, I'm new. When I first came up, I said, I'm somebody new. I have nothing to do with George Avenue.
The second question is, in your survey, you mentioned the statistical value for questions respondents to, I believe it was open space and recreation lands turned into high-density development. And were you in favor of it or disfavor of it? I think that's one of your
I have
initial
two questions related to that. I had the first one that asked, whoops, I'm on the wrong page, excuse me. And as I said, you'll have this, how they felt about changing existing recreational and open space zoning to allow for building high-density homes in Titusville. This is certainly, I'm in the Royal Oak area. This is something that's near and dear to our heart with what's going on with the proposal for the golf course. And
Yeah, I think you answered my question with that. You're focused on what would be, in a commercial sense, a golf course redeveloped with something because it's not working as a golf course when you connotate it as open space and recreation.
Well, I think the open space and recreational, I'm concerned not just about golf courses, but just the whole concept of having open space and recreational. And those spaces, particularly related to the second question, are very relevant to flooding. When I look at what's going on in Miami, it's terrifying. I mean, it really is.
One of the purposes of my question was the city has designated land uses for open space conservation, and those places are subject to comprehensive plan amendments and subsequently zoning changes through public hearing processes. With respect to some people envision, when you ask them the question, that the woods by my home, like this particular property sounds like it looks like, beautiful undeveloped woods, that becomes a neighborhood kind of vision of open space.
Sure.
But in that particular case, it's got existing land use and zoning designations that make it pretty difficult for public bodies to tell people who own the land they can't develop it because we like open space. I just want to be sure that your questions at least allow people to understand it's not that it's open space, it's that it's designated.
It's zoned and it says open space and recreational zoning. It's specifically in the question.
Thank you. Answer my questions.
Okay.
Any other discussion? We may be in touch with you.
By all means. You can reach me. I didn't put,
Thank you for coming.
I don't think I put my phone number, but you can find me. I'm going to give these out right now, if that's okay with you.
Anyone else under citizens to be heard? Anyone else? Okay, we're going to close citizens to be heard. We'll go back to the number 9A, the comprehensive plan amendment. Brad?
On page 9 of your packet, it begins the start of the agenda item for the comprehensive plan amendment, number 1-2023. This is the water supplies facilities work plan for 2023. Staff is recommending approval of the ordinance to the City Council to adopt this comprehensive plan amendment. It's a regular amendment. It's a text amendment. It's already been reviewed by the state's land planning agency, and they provided no comment.
We did review this before, I believe.
I'm sorry?
I think P&Z reviewed this once before.
You reviewed it once before during the transmittal hearings that you made recommendation to council. They approved it, went to the state. We received it back, no comments. I've included the letters from the state agencies. And so unless you have any questions about this, since this was brought before you last time, I'll try and answer any questions.
Member Rogers.
Well, I just wondered, like, I just had a few questions of things that I just ran across while I was reading through it, but I'm not even sure that this is the place to ask those questions. I mean, like, for example, you know, on page 13, they were just talking about, sources for water, and future sources for water. I just thought, have we looked at desalinization or desalination? I never know how it's said. But maybe this isn't the time to talk about that.
I don't believe that was addressed in this water supplies plan. This is something that was required by this legislature several years ago. They've included a requirement that every jurisdiction have to adopt a water supplies plan once a regional water management district has adopted or completed their own plan. And we have 18 months to adopt ours from the date that the regional water management district adopts theirs. I've included a letter on page 18, or an email from the St. John's Water Management District telling us that they had approved their plan and we have a certain amount of time to do ours. That's what this is about. I don't believe the plan indicates anything about desalinization as an option. It does say that in the horizon from 2022 to 2042, we will be okay as far as our water needs based on growth up to 2035. Beyond that, we will have to start seriously making some considerations as far as water capital improvement projects to address growth beyond that date. But it gives some examples of that. I believe on page 143 of your packet, and that's the water supplies plan. I'm sorry, 43, excuse me. It does talk a little bit about that demand I just mentioned and why, because of some of the types of growth that's happening. And then further down on the next few pages, you'll see some generalized ideas of projects that would be, that the city could do.
Is MIMS pulling from the same place that we pull from?
I believe that MIMS has their own county utility.
Okay.
It's not part of the city of
It's not those
Titusville.
wells along the bike trail out into as far as you know, out on Orantia Road, north of, or rather west of 95.
I mean, we do draw water from a few wells here in the city, and and those are located in our areas of critical concern, if you remember. But we also draw a significant amount of water, or plan to, at the north part of the county into Volusia County. So I don't believe the MIMS system is part of that at all.
Member Moscoso.
Yeah, I went back and watched the city council meeting on it, and I do think that the plan that is given, it was really informative to me. I learned a lot. I didn't realize that we purchased 10% of our water from the city of Cocoa. So that was interesting. But one question I had, and this might be a question for Kevin, but Brad, I'm going to ask you. It said that there's $45,000 annually on customer education. And so I think this is such a hot topic right now with clean water from the lagoon and drinking water and things like that, that I would love to know what that $45,000 is going to, because there are some loud voices out there. And if the city is got this great plan, I think it would be great for the public to know about it. So, yeah, do you happen to know where that money's being spent?
Where did you find that in the packet?
Yeah, on page 44.
Okay. Okay, I will see if I can get an answer from the commission.
Thank you.
I remember when this was discussed months ago, and Vice Chairman Aton made the comment, and in terms of the music played by ELO, I can't get it out of my head. You made a remark that the growth for existing building facilities, like apartments and single-family homes, those that have started, vastly exceeds the amount of water we'll need in 2035.
Based on the charter, yeah.
So I agree with the vice chairman. I don't think those numbers agree. I think it's far more either that or we're going to have a housing slump, and so many of these apartments and single-family homes are going to remain vacant because it doesn't agree with the amount of the water that's projected that we need in 2035. Remember Aton?
Yeah.
Vice Chairman Aton.
I think Chairman Richardson's referring to the chart on page 4, top of page 44, and it shows from now till 2025 a growth of whatever 3,700 population. And I also sit on North Brevard Economic Development Zone and a bunch of other, we get presentations from city manager that talk about the permitting and housing starts and subdivisions that are already permitted. And it sure seems like a lot more than 3,800 population growth over that period. And then if you apply that to even the 2030, it just seems like we should somehow reconcile the rooftops or residences and population that we're building in Titusville to these numbers, because it just doesn't seem to match up.
This is a long-term plan, and our comprehensive plan requires us to plan out in 5-year increments as far as capital improvements. So this is just an idea of our needs are, so we can have an idea of what to plan for in the future. And we do the comprehensive plan schedule of capital improvements every year. I think you were here when we did that last year. That's something we do annually. And we use that as a monitoring tool. So we reference documents like this to include projects in that schedule so that we can plan for that type of growth over time. Now, 10 years from now, the projections might change completely based on what's going on in the market, or who knows, or another COVID, or who knows what's happening. So there's a lot of estimate. It's not a science behind it.
Sure.
As you can imagine. It's more of a planning tool, a monitoring tool, is what you see here.
So there's an annual checkup as to how we're tracking against these numbers?
So we do a population estimate every year that includes even the areas in our water service area that are unincorporated portions of that water service area. So we look at what that demand is going to be. We monitor this every year. We have to look at our, see if we're meeting or going to potentially exceed our level of service standard for water consumption. We do that as part of the CIE Capital Improvement Program update every year. So we provide you a level of service report that addresses that. We reference these kind of documents and then put that in that annual report to determine whether we need to do something now or figure out if we need to do something in the near future. This document is kind of telling us, here's when we probably need to really start really being concerned about needs at a date beyond that 5-year time frame. So now we have an idea that 2035 is around that time is probably when we really need to start being concerned. So we probably need to consider maybe some projects that are long-term, but not necessarily within that immediate 5-year program. So that's really what this is about. It's a monitoring tool just so we can look at this. This plan doesn't get updated every year, though. This is just something that the Water Management District and the legislature asks us to do. It's a good tool to have. But we generally have one right now as part of our annual update to our capital improvement schedule in our comprehensive plan. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, I think, my concern is the number that's in 2035 might be here in 2028.
Yeah, exactly. I think the number's vastly understated. Member Grant, Vice Secretary Grant.
Just him. Mr. Parrish, I didn't see too many amendments to the comprehensive plan on this, except but the one that stood out for me, there were some words that were deleted, something like that. But the one that stood out for me is the Infrastructure Policy 2.1.1B for potable water facilities. That's on page 12. And on the average water consumption rate, it mentions 81 gallons per day or something like that. But in the comprehensive plan, it was 96.4. What made the difference?
the rate of consumption is basically lower. It's not the need, and it's talking about just the rate of consumption. I think you see in the water plan actually identifies that, or states that 96 million gallons a day is really not happening. It's really a lower rate, actually. I want to point you to page 42 and 43 of your packet into the water management plan. And I believe it's here where you start to see some description about that demand and how it's actually lower than what that level of service standard you see in our current comprehensive plan is. So it's kind of justifies bringing that level of service standard down a little bit.
So how many times we have to go back and do the math when after we do a comprehensive plan? How many times we have to go back and do the math? I mean, it's already changed from whenever this one was published. You know what I'm saying?
No, sir, I don't understand.
Okay, well, never mind then. I won't get into too many problems here. I was just concerned about, well, not concerned about, I was just curious about what made the big difference in the numbers, that's all. But I heard what you said. Thank you.
So this is what I've heard from the Water Resources Director before he retired. He explained to me that consider maybe back at the types of development that were happening in the 70s and 80s. You had water fixtures that consume more water, toilets that were, each flush was more water, and things like that. Today, when you build new housing and new fixtures in commercial spaces or replacement of toilets in existing homes or older homes, they use less water. So the consumption rate is actually, in reality, a lot lower than what that level of service standard is in our current comprehensive plan. That's how it was described to me.
Okay.
So you see this, you see that, you have to look at that demand per, Mr. Gerald, help me with this, equivalent ERU, equivalent residential unit.
Yeah.
And so that's a kind of a metric that water service departments will use. So each residential unit, which includes all fixtures, whatever, in that particular residential unit. And so it's a generalized rate or an average rate, basically, of water consumption. You add that up, you've got how much you've got for the entire city. You kind of look at that, and over time, because the fixtures have changed, it's kind of the rate has actually dropped a little bit. But then this plan looks at, well, our population is increasing.
Yes.
But it's definitely not, our need is probably not going to be as great as we thought based on the old level of service standard.
Well, that was my concern is about the future of Titusville is the level of service when it comes to water. And there's more and more development coming almost every day.
Yes.
And it's amazing that the consumption rate can go down as the population increases.
Yeah. It's interesting, but that's the way it was explained to me because of technology and just trends and changes over time.
Welcome to the 21st century.
Member Garrett.
I had a couple of comments I was going to share, and your interest in that is back when you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, this had been before, so I'd spoken with staff about reading through it, and that was when I was just joining, so I came to awareness. And the reduction, which really kind of makes easy to understand sense, is what Brad had talked about with the low flow capacity, and that's been cut again. I was just visiting with a friend who was complaining about having to install the toilets you now buy are even less volume per flush than the ones you were forced to buy when they went down to 1.5 liters per flush. And when you do something comprehensive like that, all new houses have to have this, it makes an effective difference, especially when you're talking about a flush of a toilet's now less than half of what it used to be. It used to be 3 gallons, then it was 1.5, and now that's cut in half to 0.75. And, if you think about all new housing starts, get those kind of toilets, you could see how that computes into these lessening demands because it just comes up that way. And that's good for, I think, everybody to know that's the success side of something that's frustrating when someone says, but I want 3 gallons per flush.
I do.
I also wanted to add, when I spoke about reading this back the first time you all saw it, we saw it, what struck me importantly enough is, to try to simplify my understanding, you have the water wells and the system for water, potable water, in the south part of the town for the most part. And then you've got all these protective zones around it, these critical concerns to protect the integrity of the well field, so you don't want bad stuff leaching into your groundwater. And of course, I was very surprised by coincidence coming up from Cocoa this past week. I can't believe I didn't see it, but there was the City of Titusville city limit sign. And it was just north of Port St. John. And with cities' growth, as cities grow, you always have a particular interesting problem. I came from an environment like that where you have this master plan unincorporated community that operates, as people see it, as a city by another name. And you have a city who's providing the services, and the way you offset the costs for services is you grow in order to pay for the improvements. That's kind of basic stuff. But it shocked me that the direction of growth would appear to me, because of where the water system is provided, to be southerly. Everything wants to go between I-95 and US 1 going towards Port St. John, where the incorporated city limits are. On the other hand, north of town, up north of Mims, out in the woods, is the wellhead area that's supplying better water, from what I read, than if better water means it's higher quality, the less particles of stuff measured against one another, the better water comes out of the north part of the town, and where it's all undeveloped. And it is in a location that the next city north would be New Smyrna. I don't think Oak Hill is still incorporated, and I don't think Oak Hill would be much competition to a city's growth. And my point was, it kind of surprised me that the city comprehensive plan, their water element, potable water element, is not maybe considering changing the direction of where Titusville grows to the northern direction, where you have the better well system. And from that connectivity, making people connect is how you obtain this growth in the city. I mentioned this only for purposes of an example. There was a time way back when in the city of Kissimmee was having a public water system that was not really part of the city. It was separate, although it was an extension of the city. They incorporated that into a utility authority and then took over the water system from the city of Kissimmee. And the director at the time, in an outstanding decision, went out to the west by 15 miles west of the city limit boundaries, not too dissimilar from the well fields north in Mims, and made a strategic decision that what they needed to do, because they had similar problems with discharge in Lake Tahopa-Calega, poor soil conditions, potable water wells that have been there for 100 years, that the growth could be supported by going west of the city limits, creating a well field and a spray field. Now they got both of them. They have a RIB system, rapid infiltration basin system, and they purchased this large area of land so they could grow their sewer and their water, even though it was not contiguous with the city limits. And in doing so, they took and connected all of these private systems. When you ask about MIMS, they forcibly connected these private systems, purchased them out, and connected them to the utility authority. And in that regard, started creating the infrastructure so that now the growth between hotels and motels and businesses and commerce and residents and high density, it's all moving west where the water system is. And so it was an observation I had that I certainly would think that in the next 2 planning cycles over the next 10 years, it would be at least considerable to start looking, what about if we send our growth away from the southern part where you have critical concern areas and limitations? And I think at some point those wells actually in the projection won't serve the city in long range. The wells that are providing where the growth is going are going to fail. Fail means they can't provide the volume of water necessary. That leaves you with what's going north. So to me, myself and I, it's something to put on a planning horizon, maybe workshop it and start to ask the questions, should we grow north or should we grow south? And how do we grow north to make the business of government, that being providing services, cost effective for residents? all I have to say. Thank you.
Member Rogers.
I just, changing the subject slightly, on one of these charts, there was a reference to recreation and open space. This is on page 14. And the target is 8 acres of parkland per 1,000 residents within the city limits. I just wondered, are we doing okay on that? We are, okay. But
Yes.
the other thing that made me sort of wonder was, if we're not doing okay on something, how does the city know, or how do we know? Is there generated every now and then a list where somebody kind of scans through this and says, actually, we got a problem on the average acreage ratio, and then it becomes a thing that, that we hear about or the commission hears about? Is there a mechanism for that?
Yes, there is a statutorily required update to our capital improvements element. It's a 5-year capital improvement schedule. We have to bring that before the Planning and Zoning Commission and the City Council before the end of each year. So yes, there is a process for that, a monitoring process.
Would come up in that situation?
Yes, we look at all the facilities. What you see here on page 14 are concurrency-related facilities and their level of service standards. We look at those, monitor them, and provide a statement as to whether we are meeting or exceeding a particular standard. If we're exceeding it, we need to provide some kind of, or going to exceed it at some point within this 5-year plan horizon, that we need to have some kind of idea or plan to be able to address it. And that's what the schedule is supposed to do.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, because I was just looking at this thinking, well, that's something that hadn't occurred to me. How are we doing on that? And it's important and that sort of thing. And anyway, thanks.
Okay, I'll open the public hearing right now. Does anyone care to speak on item 9A? Oh, I thought you were getting up. Anyone care to speak on this item? Okay, public hearing is closed. And Chelsea, are you there, or you're falling asleep?
I'm not asleep. I'm right here listening to everything you're saying.
Okay. Back to the commission. Does anyone care to make a motion or any further discussion?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to approve.
Well, I actually had one more discussion.
Member Rogers.
I just, do we have a historic register here that covers historic properties and
Yes, we do.
okay. And, do we have any kind of a list of historic properties that's kind of like, okay, these are some real gems in the city, even if it's stuff that's not quite as old, like mid-century modern or something like that, that at least are on a watch list in case like a demolition permit comes up for one, that maybe we would, sort of, is there anything?
Yes, we do.
Excellent. All right. That's the end of my question.
I do, just to answer Mr. Grant's question, is if you look at page 43, you will see in those paragraphs, the discussion about the trend reduction of consumption going down and the justification for the new level of service standard. And then on page 33, for anybody else who's interested, our additional source of water, where it comes from. You see on that aerial, there's a large area in the north part of the county where we also withdraw our water.
Member Garrard.
As I was making a motion to approve the comprehensive plan, item 9A, amendment 2023 water supply facilities work plan. Is that the right terminology?
Second.
Motion to recommend approval and seconded by Member Grant. Any other discussion? Roll call vote.
Member Garrard.
Yes.
Vice Chairman Aton.
Yes.
Member Perez.
Yes.
Member Moscoso.
Yes.
Secretary Grant.
Yes.
Member Faison.
Yes.
Chairman Richardson.
Yes, and this will be heard by City Council at their meeting. I read it somewhere.
The 26th.
September 26th. Next is item 9B.
Do you want me to go through that one now, or would you like to go through the conditional use permit one? The conditional use permit has an action item related to it,
Okay,
and the comp plan item does not.
okay, go ahead with 9C.
Okay. 9C is an ordinance. It's on page 147 of your packet. The City Council, back in May of 2022, directed the staff to evaluate existing conditional use permits uses within the code and provide recommendations on those which are overly restrictive, outdated, or those which should be reclassified as limited and permitted uses. The staff is recommending certain changes to this current code in order to enhance usability of the code while protecting property rights of commercial property owners. I won't go through this in detail, but I will highlight a few of the uses in there that we're proposing to make changes to. If you're not familiar with this, in our code, we have a use table. You'll see that on page, it begins on page 151. It's a rather large spreadsheet looking thing.
Goes to probably page 251.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I don't like that spreadsheet.
Okay. Well, if you see the spreadsheet, it has all the zoning districts on the top row, and then the first column are all the uses that are permitted or not permitted in each of those zoning districts. And so the key there says a P equals permitted use. An L means it's a permitted use, but it has certain limitations. And then a C is a permitted use, but it requires a public hearing. That's the conditional use. If there is no letter or key or number or whatever it might be inside a particular cell, that means that use is prohibited. So what we've done, and I'm just going to point you to page 159 of your packet, is you'll see the uses. And for the first one there, page 159, you'll see billiards/pool halls is a particular permitted use in the code. And you can see in that short table there of all the zoning districts and the key P, L, or C, whether it's permitted with limitations, or requires a public hearing. We're suggesting that it be allowed, instead of requiring a public hearing in the regional commercial zoning district, to now be allowed as a permitted use. And you'll see that trend continue in the subsequent pages. Further down, convenience stores, in parentheses, without retail gasoline sales, that's a particular use. We're suggesting that in the tourist zoning district, that it not be required to have the public hearing, that it be permitted with certain limitations. On the next page, you'll see on page 160 of your packet, fitness center, same thing. Where it's required to have a public hearing in the hospital medical zoning, in the neighborhood commercial zoning, or in the office professional zoning. We're reducing it down to either permitted or permitted with limitations. This is what City Council asked it to do. They didn't give us specific direction on any particular use. They just asked staff to propose something that makes more sense. So that's what we have here for you this evening. If you'd like, I can go through the rest of them or just answer questions if you have about it.
Member Garrod.
I had one question, and maybe I'm reading more than I should. So you're permitting something that was conditional. That's pretty easy to understand. But with the standards which appear on page 160, if I read this right, you're striking through the relationship to fuel pumps as an existing standard. But above that, you have a standard that says shall not allow any outdoor display of merchandise. And that,
which use are we talking
page
about?
160,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a strike through on item 2B.
Okay.
And above it, item 2A. And what I found interesting was that's in, I believe, the convenience store district. In any zoning district, and I'm trying to come to, I see outdoor merchandise like through the streets here downtown. Some of the merchants put their merchandise out on the sidewalks. Is there a real good reason why you don't, or why they have a code that says you can't have outdoor merchandise display? I see a lot of outdoor merchandise displayed in convenience stores, which sounds like maybe everybody's not following the existing rule.
I believe you're asking so right now, a convenience store in the downtown mixed-use zoning district currently is prohibited from having an outdoor display. And the question is why?
Well, yes, since outdoor display in that same zoning district for commercial purposes is currently okay.
Well, this is specific, the condition you're looking at is specifically to the downtown mixed-use zoning district, and that is the CRA.
this area we're in here is
Correct.
in the
Yeah, yeah.
CRA?
Yes, sir.
And this here area along Main Street,
Yes.
along US 1 is in that?
Segment, yes, this segment of US 1 from, I believe Buffalo, all the way going down to Gray Street is in the CRA. So that's where this particular zoning district is applicable.
And so the Cumberland Farms they built a few years ago? that's
That
in
is
it?
also in the CRA, yes.
So I'm trying to understand why commercial use for retail sales at Cumberland Farms can't display outside, but the businesses here, in some regards, display outside to the point you have to walk around them on the sidewalk. And I had a hard time understanding what purpose that really had.
I don't have a reason for it. I don't have an answer
It's
for
just
that.
the
Yeah,
rule.
yeah, because you're looking at language that's already currently existing. We didn't touch it.
Okay.
But if you believe that's something we need to make more flexible, that's something you can
I
include
was
as part of
getting
your
them, I'm glad you
recommendation.
used the word flexibility. It
Okay.
seems like what the city council sent this through to be accomplished, to be more flexible, to support those kind of businesses in this area without having to be the onerous conditional use process.
Well, this ordinance addresses conditional use permits or uses that currently require a conditional use permit in a lot of zoning districts throughout the city. So what they're asking us to do to make it a little more easier, because they don't believe a lot of the uses that are listed really need to have a public hearing. And I think that's what they're
I
getting
think
at.
that's a great direction in creating flexible standards. That's why when I read that, I said that just seems kind of odd to take a convenience store and say no outside display, but next door could be motorcycle sales. I don't know that that would be a good analogy, but they
So-
could outside display.
Just so you know, there are very specific outdoor display standards for merchants inside the downtown mixed-use zoning district, inside the CRA. There is a different set of standards for commercial and retail in all other zoning districts throughout the city.
So perhaps maybe the same standard in that zoning district of the downtown mixed use inside the CRA for permitted
convenience
uses
stores?
should consider possibly allowing outdoor display if in fact you had one developed, because I can't myself separate what the difference would really be. Does
Okay.
anybody make sense to, as a question? And that, I guess, in question format would be to ask the city council if that's something they would want to maybe focus on, that it, again, might help the flexibility side. It certainly eliminate the need to go through code enforcement if somebody's got 14, 12 packs of 7-Up parked at the front door. Thank you.
Member Grant.
Oh, okay. This is already part of the, I guess, the ordinance for, what am I looking at here? Hold on. The convenience stores, I believe, that does not have, hold on, let me get my stuff together here. On, oh, yeah. Give me 1 second. I lost myself, yeah. On the convenience stores without retail gasoline sales. I'm just curious, I know this is not part of this discussion, but under 1B, you said that, well, they said that that they should have appropriate security systems to include, but not limited to, the following: convenience stores shall be equipped with cameras and video retrieval capabilities. This requirement shall be exempt if the convenience store employs 2 or more employees at the same time between the hours of 11 p.m. and 7 a.m., or if it closes by 11 p.m. What facilitated that? Because it seems to me that things are not getting any better out there. You can ask these guys, they'll tell you.
I recall that there is a state law related to convenience stores and security requirements. And this, I believe, is language that was adopted in response to that state law. I think it was adopted in the early 90s.
It needs to be updated. Thank you.
Any other questions or concerns? At this time, I'll open the public hearing. Does anyone care to speak on this item? You're sitting there. Anyone care to speak? Okay, I'll close the public hearing and it comes back to the commission. Your consideration. Member Grant.
Oh,
Secretary Grant.
forgot to turn it off. But anyway, I'll recommend approval of this ordinance for commercial conditional use permits.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any other discussion? Roll call vote.
Secretary Grant,
Yes, ma'am.
Member Faison,
Yes.
Vice Chairman Aton,
Yes.
Member Garad,
Yes?
Member Perez,
Yes.
Member Moscoso,
Yes.
Chairman Richardson.
Yes. When will this be heard by City Council?
The first meeting is on the 26th, and then the public hearing should be the 10th.
Okay. We'll go back to item 9B, which doesn't require any action, right?
Correct.
Okay. You leaving us? No. Oh, okay.
So this, I'm going to give you a presentation. I'm going to go through it as quickly as possible because I think a lot of you are aware of this, and you may have attended the city council meetings or watched the city council meetings at least, and followed what was going on in March, April, and May, and again in August. And may have attended the very first initial workshop we had in February related to this project. Just to give you a little background, though, this actually really started in the fall of 2017. This is the Titusville Tomorrow project. Some of you may be familiar with this. There were many workshops and meetings with Planning and Zoning Commission at that time, City Council, and we were with several consultants actually working together. We had Kane and Associates, some people from Jacksonville, and another consultant working on this. And in response to requirements of what we had to update into our comprehensive plan, we decided to rewrite a new comprehensive plan. That's on the website, the city's website, under the tag Titusville Tomorrow. It's there now. You're welcome to look at it. We eventually brought it before or sent it to the state. We received some objections, primarily transportation related and traffic related from FDOT. And then there were some other issues that came up, including COVID and some new restrictions from the legislature that were passed down to us that caused us to make a recommendation to City Council to reconsider a different alternative. They decided not to adopt the comprehensive plan. That was in 2021. They gave us direction to go forward with looking at the plan itself and pulling out what we believe is appropriate or what we like, and then incorporating it into our current adopted comprehensive plan. So I'm just going to, that started again in February, had presentations again throughout the rest of spring and into summer. I'm going to give you the highlights. Council has already asked us to go out to the public and get more input before we even schedule transmittal hearings on the draft amendments that our consultant drafted related to this project. They've also included some draft changes to the code, which will have to be worked on even after, if this comp plan amendment is sent to the state for review. We'll continue to work on those code sections, and we'll bring this back in parts to you as well. But there's no action item tonight. I'm just going to give you the highlights of what we've been doing. Eventually, if City Council goes forward and schedules the transmittal hearings, you will have a public hearing on them, on the amendments. And then if they decide to go forward with the code changes, those will come to you as ordinances. So they asked us first to do some public engagement. We've scheduled 3 meetings. I've shared with all of you the flyer that we have scheduling those meetings. We had first one meeting, and Ms. Moscoso attended our first meeting on Monday. Pretty well attended. Were you there, Mr. Atton? I'm sorry. Okay. So it was really well attended, actually. I was really happily surprised. I mean, I was very excited that a lot of people came to that meeting. We have 2 more, one on the 28th of September here in this room, and then a third one at the Harry T. Moore Center on October 5th. Each of the 3 meetings are addressing the 3 major areas, focus areas that our consultant was looking at. Downtown, the neighborhood just to the west of the downtown has been called Titusville West or Canaveral Heights, and then the commercial corridors, the gateway corridors. So I'll go through these slides. I'm not going to go through the amendment policies line by line or show that. I'm leaving that to you to take a look at that. If you'd like, I can bring this back. If you have specific questions, we can go through it in more detail if you like. But I'm just going to show you the presentation that the consultant gave to the City Council in August 8th. So they are proposing several citywide goals, objectives, and policies into the comprehensive plan. And so it's not just the downtown, but everywhere else in the city. So they're really focusing or trying to introduce some language in here based on the visioning exercises that happened back in 2017 and 18, and that were adopted by council back then to help jumpstart that comp plan update back then. That talk about creating a thriving historic city, a welcoming small town ambience, healthy, active, and waterfront. And so they really they believe the waterfront, the downtown, and our commercial quarters are really important. But we also looked at the area just to the west of the downtown. They focused on those areas mainly to figure out what could be done. And they came up with some ideas and vision and images that they shared with everyone. And then they used that and got some input from the public, and then they used that to kind of inform the decisions as to what kind of policy changes to make into the comprehensive plan and what kind of code changes to make. Citywide element that they're proposing is a brand new type of chapter to the comprehensive plan. It includes new objectives and policies, creating a high quality life for residents and visitors, capitalizing on the dynamic regional economic forces in the Space Coast, and so on. Creating a variety of businesses and employment opportunities. So these are, and creating a place-based design reflecting small town character. So these objectives, this is what we want to try and achieve over time. Future land use amendments. They're proposing a few amendments here. Goal 1, growth management and land uses. To direct growth to suitable areas that make wise use of existing infrastructure investments, compact development, connected, complete neighborhoods, and facilitate access to services, amenities, economic opportunities, while protecting the public health and safety and welfare. So they have several objectives that they're proposing in here. You'll see in the draft in your packet here, all these amendments, strike through and underline, of the first 3 elements of the comprehensive plan. They were directed really only to focus on 3 portions of the comp plan: future land use, housing, and transportation. There are many other chapters they could have touched, but we did not give them that direction to look at that. So downtown, they're proposing some language specific to the downtown that create a sense of place, placemaking, memorable identity, creating a destination, and finding ways to do that. Making the downtown a very walkable and bike-friendly area, more attractive green park spaces, making a place for businesses to grow and thrive, and reimagining the downtown that can enrich adjacent neighborhoods, specifically Titusville West or West Titusville, now also known as Canaveral Heights. They look at that area as supporting the downtown with residential, and the core being the downtown. So they've identified new objectives and new policies subsequent to those objectives. If you haven't seen or gone through the comp plan yet, it's structured. Each one of these elements or chapters have a goal, then an objective, then a policy. And sometimes you see strategies in each one of those. Downtown is the heart of Titusville. Downtown should have a memorable identity, foster a great variety of activities, and attract a critical mass of people. Another amendment, encourage development and redevelopment that allows a large variety of uses, and increase the residential population, including residential, civic, and employment uses, all within close proximity to each other in the downtown. Some of the changes and how they'll affect the city, so here they looked at several streets. They looked at just in the downtown, they focused on certain areas, not the entire downtown. They didn't look at the entire CRA. They just looked at from Garden Street down to South Street, from the river to the railroad. And then in that box, they looked at 3 little main areas. And I tried to figure out ways that those areas could be, what opportunities are there and how they can be enhanced, and what standards would need to be in place in order to allow that kind of vision. So for example, they looked at the area at the northwest corner where Garden and the railroad meet. So this area, this image you see on the right side is a possibility of types of housing that could potentially be there. One thing that they are suggesting is what's called a density pool. And this is a pretty important component of this amendment. So typically density, residential density is counted or calculated based on acreage. residential number of units per acre. So we have a maximum in each land use category or each area of the city, and it has a maximum prescribed of, here's your maximum density per acre. In the downtown, it's 30 units per acre. You have an acre piece of property, you can put 30 units on it in some way, meeting all the other requirements, you can go forward. The problem with that in the downtown is that there are a lot of properties that are never going to be able to utilize that density. City Hall has residential density here that can never be utilized. It should be utilized somewhere else potentially. A lot of the churches have that too. They are never going to have residential uses on there, but they have vested there that can be used in some way. Well, if some of these properties are not going to ever be developed in that way, such as parks or public parks, maybe that density can be reallocated somewhere. The density pool is basically a bank that a developer can utilize, pull from it, and put as many residential units on a piece of property they can potentially do and accommodate on there, provided they meet all the other requirements. So it's a more efficient use of using density without having to go through an amendment to increase density in your downtown. So think of it this way. In that box of Garden to South, FEC to the water, you've got 2,000 residential units there in that pool. Well, that can be reallocated any way we want based on what the developer's asking for. And you're not going to have, I don't think you're going to have an issue as far as who's the last man in, not going to be able to get enough units. We've determined that in the downtown, the number of residential uses or units that have been added to the downtown to the CRA in the past 20 years have been really low. So we don't think that we're going to come to that point where they're going to meet capacity and the last person is not going to be able to put any residential units on their property. The gap is so wide. This is the downtown subdistrict. If you remember, the downtown zoning district has various sub-districts in them. It's just a zoning tool. So they're suggesting some allowing a density incentive program. So allow that density, someone to use that density pool to put a number of residential units on a piece of property, they can accommodate it, but up to a max. And if they go up to a point, get something from it, from that developer. And so they've included in the tools in the zoning code that's in your packet some ideas of how that can work, such as asking for public allocation of their parking garage for the public itself, things of that nature. All right, so I'm going to keep going. That's talking about the density pool. Multimodal environment. This is talking about the transportation element. Creating our transportation element right now is very heavy about capacity on roads. Doesn't really talk much about complete streets and creating multimodal neighborhoods or transportation facilities or pedestrian pathways. All it's really talking about is, do we have enough wide enough roads to handle traffic? And so what they're suggesting is some additional policies that really address what the downtown is about. You look at the downtown from an aerial view, you see these grids, these blocks. You can see the traffic can easily be distributed in a system like that versus out in the outskirts of the city where you have one major road where everything has to be dumped onto it. Having appropriate policies in your downtown to accommodate the pedestrians who are going to be also sharing the same roads with the cars is really important. That's what they're really suggesting here. So they're suggesting reducing your parking requirements in the downtown. They're proposing urban design standards, rechanging them a little bit. We already have them in our downtown code right now, but they're suggesting maybe some tweaks to that. They are suggesting removing the minimum lot size requirement in the downtown. Creating policies and code requirements that allow that really enhance the visual attractiveness of the downtown by enhancing streetscapes, creating a network of public spaces and street trees. This is an example of a cross-section of Palm Avenue. That's what they were looking at as an example of what could potentially happen there. So let's say it's only 50 feet wide, so you have your roads and your sidewalks and your curb and gutter and maybe an on-street sidewalk, or I'm sorry, on-street bike lane, whatever that might be. maybe it's not enough space to be able to put the on-street parking spaces and have narrow lanes and have the vegetation on the street, on the sidewalks. Maybe the sidewalks aren't wide enough within that right of way. They're suggesting a tool to allow developers to be able to utilize and increase density, but the trade-off, they give us some amount of the frontage of the property, either as a deed, or I'm sorry, as an easement rather, that be counted towards technically a wider right-of-way to accommodate wider sidewalks.
Brad, this is the portion of it that I think is totally unrealistic. Some of those businesses and churches and things along Palm Avenue, they're close to the road. You can't possibly expand the sidewalks without tearing up the buildings.
Right, so this is about redevelopment. That's what this is about. Because you have an existing development, that's not, yeah, I agree with you, it's not really possible unless the property's going to be redeveloped. And the developer, or I'm sorry, the applicant consultant was seeing a lot of opportunity on this particular road, on Palm, for example. They also saw it on Garden. And so they showed some illustrations, same cross-sections along Garden as well. Orient waterfront access. So I don't have images here, but they showed some ideas of creating waterfront parks and looked at all the properties along the water to see what could potentially be used. They even looked at the Titusville Housing Authority's property, and even a bank property. And then they decided, based on the reaction to the public, they looked at the Commons parking lot as a green space that could be adjacent to the downtown, like you see in some of the other town centers in Winter Park or Cocoa Village. So then the urban mixed use, which is Canaveral Heights, this is the area to the west that's going to support the downtown. So they're proposing an objective that the city shall have a vibrant urban neighborhoods that accommodate a variety of household types. So instead of just single-family home, you can also include duplexes, triplexes, quadruplexes, and other types of multifamily development, the missing middle type housing. Right now, in that neighborhood west of the downtown, the maximum density per acre is 15 units per acre. So it's already there. And those types of housings types are allowed right now. What the consultant was suggesting is proposing specific design base of those types of housing so that you can show that they work. Yes, sir.
Just real quickly, are we talking west of the railroad tracks?
Yes.
East of the railroad tracks?
West.
And then how far west are we going?
I have a map right here that shows on the left side of that screen, it shows the area in that red hatch that's from the railroad. On the east side, on the north side is Garden Street. On the south side is South Street. On the west side is Park. So that's the study area. They are suggesting that the urban mixed-use land use category be expanded out into what you see on the right side of that screen. And the reason is you can see there's a hodgepodge of different types of land use categories in here. Now, I do have other slides that show their study of how they came to this conclusion that I can certainly share with you as well.
So just real quickly, so on the right side, that includes the area over by Dixie Crossroads.
I have to help me orient where Dixie Crossroads is on this map.
So
it would be west.
Right.
Of that boundary?
Well, so the map to the left is a block. So we have at the north is Garden Street, and to the west is Park Avenue.
Yeah.
Okay, that's the map to the left. The map to the right goes over one more block.
That's right. Yeah, it goes over. It shifts over a little bit.
Crossroads. Right.
Yes.
So we're talking from Dixie Crossroads all the way back over to US 1, from Garden Street down to Park Avenue. Okay.
That's correct.
Now,
Gonna go back to it?
well, so then they ask another question, and I'm just going to throw this out there. No question, no expository needed, right? This is two other zones that this overlaps, which is the opportunity zones and the hub zones. Those are two economic zones for businesses. When we do this expansion here, again, there are people that own property there, all right, that have owned it for years. And I hope that Titusville tells the current residents, the current owners of that property, how valuable that property is before people come and take it from them. I won't mention somebody's name that does it already, bought a property for under and over, okay? That property becomes extremely valuable, extremely valuable. So it goes from the value of a couple of thousands of dollars to possibly millions of dollars. And the current owners of that property could benefit from that locally before somebody tells them, "Oh, your property is not valued anything," because, for example, down Tropic there or down Main Street, we see what that area looks like now. But when this happens, that same piece of property becomes extremely valuable, especially when we're talking density.
Well, the density, just so you, there's two things I want to answer to your comments. Density right now is 15 units per acre. Almost everything there right now is 15 units per acre. So
Yes.
the density's not changing. However, the consultant is suggesting increasing it a little bit up to 20 with incentives, with something they give back. And that's in the code. The second part, the second answer I want to give you is that we can make changes all we want to the code, the comp plan. That might necessarily changes the market.
Right. No, again, I'm just saying, just the current residents that own property in that area, I hope that they understand what they're sitting on. If development starts to happen around them, that they understand what they're sitting on. That's
Understand,
all.
yeah.
It's for those guys that own that property today.
We've sent letters to each of the property owners in this study area, and our meeting on October 5th is going to be at the Heritage Center specifically about this portion of the project.
Okay, thank you.
They're proposing policies to encourage neighborhood-serving mixed-use development in this area. Currently, it's a mixed-use zoning district, mixed-use land use category, so allows mixed-use uses, but with caveats. It restricts non-residential uses to Park Avenue or to De Leon. But about 7 years ago, we worked with the community there to make that a little more flexible, so you can actually include some neighborhood stores in other parts of the neighborhood. Again, I'd like to show you the slides, which I don't have here, shows the study that the consultant did to help justify or what they're proposing here. Because they identified areas that were primarily residential, primarily commercial, and where the mixed, and they kind of made suggestions of how that can really work together. And they have good images and slides that explain that. Additional permitted uses, personal services, retails and services, up to a maximum of 10,000 square feet. Shoe repair, remove minimum lot sizes, is what they're suggesting. Encourage mixed-use development with housing that is neighborhood serving. Reduce vehicular trips by promoting walking and bicycling. Again, this area has a good grid pattern, so it can have you can have good multimodal transportation policies and development standards in there to allow for pedestrians and vehicles to share the same public right-of-way. Yes, sir.
This reminds me of Sanford. So if you guys haven't had, if you can't think of what this looks like, if you haven't been to downtown Sanford and how Sanford revitalized their area, making it more walker friendly, put businesses in every place, this reminds me of what Sanford did, and not just Sanford, but also over in, I want to say Zephyr Hills. Winter Garden's done it. But I mean, when we get to the lakefront, I think it's Zephyr Hills, wherever it's way over there, they did it as well. But if you haven't been to Sanford, if you haven't walked around Sanford, this sounds like what the whole grid pattern theme is. Again, I just hope that the landowners that own land there today are partakers of the prosperity that could come if this were to come to fruition.
Understood. Okay. So this is an aerial that shows the both, the downtown and the area to the west and the grid pattern. Again, they're proposing increasing the density to 20 units per acre, but with caveats, with incentives, things that would get returned back to us, to the city in some fashion. And they identify what that would be: enhanced public realm, affordable workforce housing, new on-street parking, ground floor neighborhood serving uses in the same building, and conglomeration of 2 or more lots for redevelopment. They harped on missing middle. If you're not familiar with that term, that basically means is what the types of housing is between single family and apartments and all in between that a lot of communities don't permit anymore. And so what they're suggesting is these types of housing can work together next to each other in the same neighborhood. Prioritize safety and local mobility on transportation facilities within the urban neighborhoods. Reduce vehicular speeds. That's one thing they emphasize as well in these neighborhoods. This is a cross-section of Main Street, I believe. And so, again, they're proposing the same concept, like I described about Palm, where the adjacent property owners, as they get redeveloped, could contribute a portion of their frontage towards a larger sidewalk. Gateway corridors. This is the last part, and this includes US 1, Garden Street, and Cheney Highway. And so basically what this is proposing new policies, new goal, objectives, and policies related to our commercial corridors and how those areas can be redeveloped, revitalized, and allow a mixture of uses. Currently, when you look along those 3 corridors, you're going to see either commercial or residential, some sort. And you generally don't see the mix of the 2 on the same property. The only areas that I'm familiar with on those streets where that is even allowed is on those properties that has the urban village zoning district. Titus Landing, they didn't take advantage of incorporating residential in that development. The Searstown Mall, the owner of that property is proposing residential as part of a mixed-use development there. And there's one other on the south part of the city. What this is suggesting is that there could be more opportunities to allow that kind of mixture of uses along these 3 major corridors. The code that is complementary to the policies that are being proposed includes an optional overlay. That's a zoning tool. So no matter what zoning districts you have in the properties, on the entire corridor, you put this overlay on top, and that kind of provides an additional tool as far as zoning and development on there, regulation. But what they're suggesting is an optional overlay, which would only come into play if a property owner decides they want to utilize that, because it might be more advantageous to them if they're going to redevelop their property. It will have specific design standards and urban design standards part of it, especially to help accommodate that mixture of uses. The urban village zoning districts has some very quasi standards in there, I guess, some language in there, but what the consultant here is suggesting is something more concrete. That optional overlay could be something that would be required if a property owner decides to change the zoning on their property from commercial to residential or vice versa. And then this overlay kicks in. We're going to have a meeting about this portion of this project in this room on the 28th. And we've sent that to several engineers and property owners, but we didn't send it out to mailers out to every property owner in those quarters. So we might have to have a subsequent meeting about this. So I won't go through all of these, but I just gave you really the crux of what these policies are describing and what this zoning tool is about. You can see an idea of what that could potentially look like on Garden Street if this was fully implemented on certain segments. This applies to US 1, Garden Street, South Street, and Cheney. It would really be heavy on appearance along those corridors. This is an example, a study area they looked at. This is where this particular study area was used in 2017 in the workshops, and again, and it's part of this second phase of this project, where this is the old Kmart property with the retail next to it. If that whole thing was redeveloped, here's an opportunity of what it could look like. You can have a mixture of residential and commercial, red being a commercial, yellow being the residential. There were other versions of that they proposed as well. So they're suggesting a pretty high density, potentially, with caveats as part of that overlay. Criteria for approval of that density bonus. They went through and created a long laundry list here of ideas that could potentially be utilized. Just so you know, I want you to be aware that if the comprehensive plan is policies that they have proposed in this amendment are directed by City Council to go forward with the hearings, that's just it. It's just the hearings. It's not about the code. The code is going to be a separate project we're going to continue to work on. The code is really about implementing those policies of the comprehensive plan. But we'll need the comprehensive plan policies in place and adopted in order to adopt those code changes. Some design enhancements for that bonus: enhanced public realm, structured parking, minimum of 2 uses in a building, enhanced landscaping, that was heavily focused in this, sustainable building design, affordable workforce housing, and public art. Here's another version of what that study area could look like. You could have residential on one half and commercial on the other half. This is on Cheney Highway. This is where that Kmart building is.
It's a storage place now.
That's correct. Yes. That's all we have. I'll try and answer more questions you have.
Member Moscoso.
Yeah, would you mind giving a bit of an overview of how the meeting went on Monday and what were the concerns of the citizens? I had to leave early, so I think that would be beneficial for everyone to hear what their concerns were about the downtown area.
Overall, the meeting went fairly well. I thought it went really well, actually. There were a lot of questions and comments about parking, concerns about that, about parking during events. Density, I didn't hear a voiced concern about that density bonus idea. I heard some support for it. Concerns about lack of events. Also concerns about blocking driveways during events, concerns about speed on US 1. I did make one comment. I asked everybody what they thought about the fact that the on-street parking was taken away from the downtown along US 1. A lot of people, I heard a sigh of concern about that, because I think what people see now is a high-speed road. So what I thought was my takeaway, many appeared to not like the removal of the on-street parking spaces. Several voiced desire to see more mixed uses, more businesses to move and open in downtown. One person was concerned about multifamily development and should only be single-family detached in the downtown. One attendee was concerned about fecal matter at Scobie Park and how this kind of development would address runoff and impact it to the lagoon. Several positive comments about the downtown and but there was a desire to see more improvements. Everyone seemed to want the downtown to be a destination place. That to me was related to placemaking. One comment was about how good landscaping is on US 1, and many persons agreed with that. A few were concerned about losing historic buildings. A few stated that historic preservation and their support of it. And I believe, Ms. Scosa, you asked me a question about policies you thought were watering down historic preservation. I'd like to meet with you to talk about that more, but my answer to you was that that wasn't the intent, to water down any historic preservation related policies in the comprehensive plan. Those were my notes from the meeting.
Perfect. No, I think it was a great meeting, and I think it's important that we hear what the public had to say about it. Yeah, there were a lot of issues about parking, but I think you handled that really well. I would love to get a copy of this presentation.
This is on the city's website. I'll share that web link with you.
Okay.
It's Titusville Tomorrow.
Wonderful.
Member Faison.
At first, I was going to be not in favor of Titusville West or Canaveral Heights, but I actually love the idea of redevelopment going that way, because as it stands right now, our downtown is pretty small. And if we can redevelop that side of the road, because it does include the mixed use. So it doesn't get rid of housing. As a matter of fact, there's an opportunity to increase the number of housing units in that area. So that's also a positive. What I did not hear was the plan for seaside development for water. What are some of the ideas of going in that direction? I'm trying to think of that place out near Mount Tavares. So, I've been out to Tavares quite a few times. I don't know if you guys have been out there, but they did develop along the water in that area. and it's beautiful. And I don't know why Titusville so far hasn't been on board with building some kind of nightlife around that, or not necessarily nightlife, but just something on the water. So I'm glad that was part of that. To connect, I guess, Canaveral Heights now with the downtown over to the water, I think that would be a beautiful, beautiful use of Titusville's land and prior planning. So thank you. I really, really do enjoy it, and I hope that we can make this happen.
Member Rogers.
I guess I'll start with the negative and finish with the positive. The negative is, to what extent are all these fabulous plans sort of trumped or made moot by all the shenanigans out of Tallahassee recently? Like if somebody comes along with a big tower and says, yeah, it's 20% or whatever it is, 40%, affordable housing based on X, Y, Z, percentages, and we're going to put a 10-story tower right in the middle of all this, and we all say, oh, well, there goes that idea. I mean, it's
So I think to answer your question is we are trying to, you're referring to the Live Local Act?
Yeah, I am.
Okay. We are trying to address that with a ordinance that is scheduled for first hearing before City Council next Tuesday. So all the jurisdictions are trying to find a way to address how to implement the Live Local Act and certify projects that qualify under that in their own way, based on their own circumstances. So every community is different in how they do zoning a little bit. And so that's what we are trying to do, but we can't prohibit a qualifying affordable housing project under Live Local that meets all the criteria in a industrially zoned or commercially zoned and mixed use area.
Okay. The second thing, which I guess is more positive, I will second what Mr. Faison said, that I do think that the waterfront is underutilized. And the place that I went recently that made me realize that was Stewart. And I don't really normally think of Stewart as being a place that has really kind of cool sort of, things to see, but they do have similarly a fairly small historic downtown. But what they did was, they've got a park that's kind of a narrow strip. Well, I mean, we have a frankly bigger waterfront, I'd say, that's publicly owned between the Space Park and the Sandpoint, and then going down, past the marina, on the other side of the marina. But they basically built a boardwalk out on the edge of the water, and it's wide enough that you can use it for walking and biking, if I remember correctly. But the cool thing was it hooked around under the bridge and then ran kind of into the marina. And so, but the marina was a public marina, and you could access, which I love to do. I love to walk down, the docks and just look at the boats. But it ran past some restaurants, but the whole thing was, and then it continued on as a biking and running trail or walking trail, kind of, off the waterfront at that point. But for quite some distance, and including going under the bridge and curling around, very similar situation like we have here. They had this, there'd be some reasons why you couldn't do it, I guess, like past the fishing pier and stuff like that. But, it opened my eyes to the possibility of using the waterfront as a recreation space by actually building a trail in the water. Now, I know that sounds kind of expensive, but I don't know. And maybe it's too expensive, but I hadn't seen that kind of thing so much, and I didn't expect to see it in Stewart, but suddenly there it was. And I guess the only other question I was going to ask was, the marina, is that completely a private marina, or is that a Titusville municipal marina that somebody just owns or works as a concession or something?
Well, we do have a municipal marina. Is that what you're asking about?
Yeah, that marina is Titusville's marina, basically. Yes. Okay. So we get income from that and that sort of thing, and
yes.
Okay. I just wondered whether it's open really, and there is a kind of a trail that runs through it, or part of the running trail. Like if you're jogging over in Sandpoint Park, you can kind of work your way around and, jog over there to the other side where the boat ramp is and the dog park and that kind of thing. But I guess I was wondering whether that could be enhanced a bit so that that was kind of doing the same thing Stewart did, where you had, that you were kind of going through the marina and going through Sandpoint Park and maybe under the bridges, but I don't know. I just off of Wells Fargo and Space Point Park, I think, or whatever that area over there got mentioned, and once again it kind of reminded me of a trail in the water that went around the coast, or the shorefront. Anyway,
I'm familiar with what you're talking about. Some communities have done that. The city, just so you know, has a waterfront master plan that was done, I believe, in 2005 or 6. I don't believe it's been updated since that date, but it's something I can share with the commission if you'd like to see it.
Member Moscoso.
Yeah, I had some of the same concerns as Member Rogers and how the Live Local Act would affect, specifically on page 41, a strategy 1.23.3.2. It says the land development code shall include the Gateway Corridor overlay incentive bonuses, permitting higher density multifamily residential uses and non-residential or mixed-use development up to 2.0 FAR. What does the 2.0, I don't know if it's FAR or FAR, what does that mean?
Floor area ratio.
Okay.
So basically what that means is if it's 2.0, you have an acre of land, you can put twice as much square footage of building on it.
Okay, thank you. And 50 units per acre with building heights not to exceed 5 stories. And so my question is, with Live Local, if this is specific to the gateway, the corridors, if somebody what is it, a mile or 2 miles wants to build, how long is, 1 mile
Yeah.
wants to build a 5-story building up to 50 units per acre, they would be allowed to, based off of the strategy also that we're allowing? Is that
That's
correct?
Possible. It's possible. I can't, this is a proposal.
Yeah.
It's something we want to evaluate to see if that's something we want to open the door for. But just so you know, that density bonus that's in here, it requires, the Live Local Act does say that even though you can utilize that height and that density with a mile, whatever the distance is that the law says, everything else still comes into play.
Yeah.
So they still have to abide by all the other standards. So if we have something like this in there, they'll have to abide by those other standards as well.
But I
in
think
order to
this
utilize
also
it.
plays to Member Fason's concern as well, that this would make that property even more valuable. We're not talking about 20 units now, we're talking up to 50 units per acre, up to 5 stories. That's immense. That changes the whole layout of our city, because if that goes from the first one from the corridor, let's say to Canaveral Heights or West Titusville, if we're just going out a mile from each, that's going to be our entire city. Will be up to 5 stories, up to 50 units per acre. And so I think that is something we really need to consider and to think about and understand by letting this go through. And I have a few other concerns. What I personally did is I took the comprehensive plan that we're currently using and I went through and I compared each one. When I read it by itself, it looks great. It looks like a great plan, and I would love to see Titusville look like this. But a lot of the language does change, and that concerns me a bit. But maybe that's something we can speak about together. But yeah, a lot of the preserving the historical and the archaeological resources, that language has been wiped out. And so I just have a few questions on that. But
Okay, before I recognize Member Garrod, is anybody interested in taking a 5-minute break?
Sure.
If not, I'll turn the gavel over to you, the Vice Chairman. Okay, 5-minute break.
chocolate. You want some?
discussion?
Not yet.
Any further discussion? I think you were next, Member Garrett.
Yes, yes. I had briefly mentioned before we started to Brad, I had kind of a litany of questions on page by page and policy by policy, but really standing back from all of the changes that are in here and that coming from the consultant and kind of generalizing things, I'd like to kind of maybe just have a short discussion on, and perhaps everybody knows about this, so it may be redundant, and I apologize, but you see the terminology pass through here between the comprehensive plan. Brad was very informative talking about goals, objectives, and policies. And then you have the capital improvements element. When we got our packages at the last meeting I was at, they had the element, which the way I look at it is to explain the way I look at it, that you have just what a goal is, and you want to be big, or you want to be small, or you want to be great. That's a goal. And you have an objective which accomplishes the goal, and you implement that objective through policies. So you see those policies, you shall do this, or you shall do that. And there's some language in here, I've noticed words that were like should as opposed to shall. Well, using that as a kind of a segue, one of the matters that I see, which is based on my experience, that occurs, and it frankly recurs quite a lot with smaller cities growing with such rapid growth, and that's plain and simple. I think every member here has spoken about seeing how much growth is taking place in Titusville, and probably historically speaking, unprecedented. We're addressing it in these goals, objectives, and policies through improvements in these neighborhood areas, the downtown mixed use, the west area plan. And the consultant's recommendations are really on point because all communities are facing these issues in Florida. Florida, in big picture, is growing, period. Well, incorporating policies that state that you're going to have landscaping and street trees and that shade sidewalks and interconnectivity and multimodal transportation and bus stops would be required. And these are kind of the negotiated improvements, as Brad described, that if you wanted to achieve these maximum densities or you wanted to achieve the flexibility of these policies, it comes with a cost, and the cost is you have to do this and you have to do that. Those are kind of woven throughout the changes that I saw on these policies, whether it's parking and structured parking as an example, or whether it's street trees. There's parts of this policies that I just would suggest, in my experience, just aren't the right way to work it out. By that I mean, there's language that would have the city adopt a rule that would require a developer to provide an easement to expand the right-of-way utilization area. Brad was really informative with the pictures that if you don't have enough right-of-way to put on-street parking and street trees and 5-foot sidewalks and these user zones in the pictures with lots of planters, you get easements for that. On one breath, that's great, and it looks really good in the picture. The policy that's in there is going to make it incumbent on the property owner that when the street tree that he was required to plant, and then he sold his development to me, who I'm now the business owner, that the code enforcement person comes by and knocks on the door and says, you know, Mr. Grod, your street tree's dying, you're going to have to replace it. And he's like, but it's in the right of way. Now it's in front of your property and it's your street tree for maintenance. So throughout this, whether it's the character of the neighborhoods, whether it's the sidewalks and the connectivity to multimodal transportation, I can use examples. Sidewalk on Hopkins Avenue from Highway 50 to US 1. Sidewalk on each side, sidewalk on one side in some sections, but a sidewalk that's probably not fully maintained. And by not maintaining it, you impede its usefulness. When a sidewalk's not maintained, anybody's been to any city sees that the street tree you were forced to plant grows the concrete, busted up, and makes the sidewalk become impassable. And the point of it is that if the city would adopt policies that are going to enhance the character of neighborhoods and create connectivity utilizing existing or new sidewalks or create project development plans in your capital improvements element, which itself is a 5-year program. And then you have capital improvements programs where year 1, year 2, or 5, that's when you spend the money. You have to accept the premise that, in my opinion, if you're going to incorporate policies, you need to look at the extension of your city services. And by that, I mean, you need to extend your city services to embrace that these street trees, these landscaping, these enhancement to the corridors with sidewalks, all of that really needs to come under the fold of the city's management. It needs to come under an organized method by where step 1 is create the goal, improve what the city looks like. And the policy is to plant street trees in the right-of-way. The policy, conversely, shouldn't be to make the property owner responsible to maintain that planting, because they're not going to, or they're going to create a disagreeable situation that exists between government telling me to do this. Can you believe that? They made me plant it. Now they tell me I have to fix it, and it's their tree. So my point is, throughout this, I think that the city should really focus on their capital improvements element. They should look at these policies and ask themselves, is it really the best way to grow with policies that require visions of these walkable, vibrant community connectivity, sidewalks, bikeways, multimodal trails, but in addition, landscaping improvements and shade trees, and do that with the thought that you make an individual by lot responsible to maintain it. And would the maintenance be good? Would they fertilize it? Would they trim it? Would they prune it? Or should the city at this point start looking forward and incorporate in their capital improvements element how they're going to maintain these improvements that are being envisioned, and in the capital improvements program, start a funding source by where you go to neighborhoods that have poor sidewalks and you improve those sidewalks and you maintain those sidewalks. And that is something that's a cost. It comes with a cost, but if you're going to want it to be that way, you have to, I believe, accept the fact that you have to share that cost. Perhaps maybe in some instances, you wouldn't have to worry about it. By that I mean, in the downtown area here, it's to the merchant's best interest to keep everything looking really good, because that's their bloodline, so to speak, to people who come here for eating and for my eye doctor, for example. All of that is because it's an enhancement they're going to want to maintain. I see the merchants out there doing that already. But when you talk about long corridors like Garden Street, Park Avenue, South Street, and to look at those and imagine that improvement and that it's going to be privately maintained, it doesn't seem to me to correlate too well. My experience tells me sooner or later, I believe Titusville will have to look at itself for funding, at least in part, an urban forester, landscape architect, horticulturist, just at the beginning. Again, my experience, that's how it starts, with an egg, and then you get a chicken, and pretty soon you got a whole bunch of chickens. You start with one person that tries to get this going. They may be the one that describes how the cost is, how you defer that cost in some cases, how you provide for that cost, and what do you cost, what do you do, which year do you do that in? And absolutely the case, you look at it from that standpoint, you have to accept that these trees will be affected, or the landscaping will get frozen with a freeze, or the car will run off the road and hit the tree and leave something. You have to plan contingencies for it. And from one person becomes more of what becomes an operational organization, where you actually have, whether it's in public works or parks and recreation. You mentioned earlier about Stewart and the walkways. I worked there for a while. Stewart and Martin County have a tremendous parks and recreation group, both the city and the county. That's how this is done. It's aggressive. They've got, as a city to city goes, they're probably a higher level of service on parks and recreation than Titusville, is just my assumption from what I see. But one day Titusville will be there. And that's my underlying point within these policies, within what's being presented to the city council, and how we'll look at it when it comes back to us, to at least look forward from the way it's been done and make the idea that we don't want to spend money, we don't have enough money, but we want these grandiose plans, you have to put some skin in the game, is the old saying, and that's as much as I can share with you rather than be point to point. I do have one thing and one point and one comment, a question for Brad, if not related to that whatsoever. If you, Brad, would look at page 74, and if I got wrong earlier about the railroad being there when it was a bikeway, page 74. And if you look down on policy 11113, item 1, redevelopment site number 1, that's Titus Landing, isn't it?
Yes.
So it would seem that as a policy to encourage something, that's already been encouraged and developed. So is that something that could be removed because it's already been done?
The land use category is urban mixed use. That particular category is located on 3 areas that have urban village zoning, but also in that area just west of the downtown that that's the subject of the study here. And so this policy you're referring to is referring to those 3 areas that are zoned urban village. So what the consultant was trying to do is to just differentiate between those 2 parts of this urban mixed use land use category.
Oh, okay.
So it has to remain in some way, because when those properties, Titus Landing and the other ones, when they get approved, or actually the master plan even for the Sears Town Mall was approved, it required comp plan amendments to update policies in this comp plan related to these 3 areas here. So that's not something we could take out.
Yeah, it's not, I understand that, but it's been accomplished was my upshot to that. Or do you see it being something that would redevelop again from what it is now?
Well, the first 2 areas have been, first one has been developed. Second one has been approved in the master plan and can be developed with a site plan. The third one is still open.
The third one and the second one, I recognize by where the geometry was, but I thought that redevelopment site 1, it's language that relates to what already was accomplished.
Yes,
Through those very policies.
Yes,
So
yes.
it's kind of like you put the check mark by it.
I think that when we do our year, we typically go through to see what's been accomplished and
done.
remove things that way.
That
Okay.
explains the answer. Thank you.
Well, I have one comment. Yeah, you've got to have the financial wherewithal to start this off, but you also got to have the management that makes it happen. I go down US 1 at 5:30 in the morning to work out, and 25 to 30% of the street lights are out. And I've complained and complained and complained, and I finally had to complain to the mayor, since at the time he was the vice principal at Titusville High School, to get the 2 street lights in front of the high school turned on, replaced. And this is an ongoing thing that's happened for 3 years. If you don't have the management to repair the existing infrastructure, how do we expect all this to happen?
I think the point in your making, I think, agreeing, I believe I would say, that's, to me, it's not a singular thing like management, but it's an acceptance that when you are going to embrace these plans, as planners go, and you're going to embrace these nice looking cross sections with vibrant downtown plants and pictures from Winter Park or wherever they got taken.
Somebody's got to maintain it.
It's almost as if you said, oh, and by the way, by adopting this, you're sending us a clear signal to revise our capital improvements element to put forth which sidewalks we're going to build, which streetlight sections will be replaced. In communities, you've seen it where I mean, good Lord, the streetlights on US 1 were put in right after they 4-laned that road, and I was a young boy, but I remember that.
Yeah,
Those are the same
1968.
streetlights. Talk about a lifetime.
The white
But
way
they're-
lighting, GE
And
lookalikes.
I am sure you have seen this in communities after communities. Street lighting on streets like US 1 represent become a focus for communities to want better street lights. Whether they look like a a bulb that looked like a tulip. I remember Hershey, Pennsylvania, the streetlights look like Hershey Kisses. But people see those and those streetlights. So what happens is someone says, we want to make it this downtown corridor, and it's a good looking cross section, and I embrace that, I adopt it, that's our goal. Phase 2 is let's put it in the element for replacing this and building that, and then we program it and we show you where the money's coming from.
I would challenge every member to drive slow and careful and count the number of lights that are out.
I can't count them because it's dark.
You'll see them. They're out. Member Moscoso.
Yeah, so I do have another specific question. On page 47 of the agenda, and so this is why I think it's very important that we compare what is in the current comprehensive plan to what they're proposing. But the new one, policy 1.3.2, require that pedestrian-oriented design features be incorporated.
I'm sorry, can you refer to the packet number?
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, packet, page 97. And it's policy 1.32. Yeah, it's page 97 of 171. So it says the city shall improve the bicycling and pedestrian environment by providing bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure and amenities by seeking to provide wider sidewalks. In new development or redevelopment, walking and bicycling shall be promoted by establishing pedestrian-friendly streets with sidewalks and or bike paths. That sounds great, and I support that. But if you look at the old comprehensive plan, the policy 1.32 says prior to the approval of building permit or functional equivalent, the city of Titusville shall consult with the applicable water supplier to determine whether adequate water supplies to serve new development will be available. And so my question is, it seems like we're not comparing apples to apples, and I'm not sure if that's what was meant to happen.
You are referring to a transportation element policy.
Oh, am I? Okay.
Versus another element policy, I believe.
Am I? Okay. Let me double check that.
Okay.
Because I've noticed a few of them, and I could be just looking at it wrong. It seems like a lot of things are.
And I totally understand that. I want to open up the opportunity, please, if you'd like to meet with me to sit down and go through some of this, I'd be happy to do that. Because eventually when this comes before you for hearing, I hope that maybe to have most of your questions answered by that point, if possible. So
I'll come back to that for you. But I think you answered this in an email, but you were hoping that the city council, this would be approved by the end of the year. Is that correct?
I'm hoping to get direction from city council by the end of the year, because that'll help us understand what we should program as far as the changes to the code, and how much time, whatever I need to get additional resources for that. And once this is sent to the state, if the council approves this hearing and it's sent to the state, they have 30 days from the date they receive it to generate comments back to us. And then we have a certain amount of time to determine whether we want to adopt it.
Yeah, I think our comprehensive plan has a lot of really good elements, and I just want to make sure that we're not losing parts of those, that they can be there and then we can add things, but we're not replacing one for the other. Because this wasn't the only instance that I found, and I'll go back and double check. But there were a few instances where the new policy had nothing to do with the old policy. And so it was like, we are just presenting this and let's wipe out everything else. And so I want to make sure, I feel like those elements are really important, that there's a chance for those to possibly remain and not to be wiped out completely, because they don't contradict each other. It just seems like it's supportive. So those are my thoughts on it.
Brad, you're not in time crunch for this, so we can extend this to another meeting. We have discussion.
You don't have to have direction on this evening. I mean, I plan to bring this back to you eventually, hopefully with council's direction as to what to do. So it'll come back to you as a hearing.
I mean, before that time.
I didn't plan to bring it back to you as another presentation like this evening without direction from City Council. I'd like to take the comments and questions you have, to take them into consideration and bring that back to City Council. They understand what everybody has said, including you and the public. If you, if you want me to bring back a portion of this as a highlight or to maybe focus on a portion, I can probably do that. But I did not have plans to bring this back to you in the same format I have this evening.
I don't think we're in the position to decide tonight what portions we're concerned about and to answer so many questions. I think we've got to have time again to study it and percolate over it, and then at one more meeting.
Well, I would suggest one-on-ones with you to answer specific questions. Because the experience that we've had prior to this with the 2040 plan, to bring it before the series, I think we had 23 meetings and workshops with Planning and Zoning Commission. And they were on that comp plan. And that's a lot of time. That's a lot of staff time. That's a lot of your time. And a lot of other stuff had to be put on hold because of that. So I would suggest, instead of trying to go through any of this word by word or line by line or policy by policy at a meeting with you, that it'd be probably better to maybe answer your individual questions as you've reviewed this, allow me to have a chance to maybe explain what's going on here, and then bring that back to you so everybody collectively has a better understanding. We have time. We have the next few months. I can schedule maybe an hour of your time just to kind of go through it individually so I can.
But if those concerns are not shared with everybody, you know, what have you accomplished? You've accomplished answering the questions from one individual.
Well, if the question, sir, is not to your satisfaction, or the answer is not to your satisfaction, it's something definitely could be brought up at that meeting collectively. I think there may be some questions you may have that could be answered to your satisfaction that probably would not be needed to be spoken about here. But I can certainly make notes in my conversation and present my findings of what my conversations here collected at the meeting. That's possible.
Member Moscoso's next.
So when this gets voted on by council, will it be voted on as a complete package, or will it be item by item?
So the comprehensive plan policies will be presented to them to get direction as to whether they want us to schedule those public hearings. And so then it'll be brought back to them with the amendments, the policies here changes, as an amendment ordinance that they would consider, and then with your recommendation, and then it'll be sent to the city council. The code changes would come to them and to you separately. So it won't be everything together, but the comprehensive plan policies would be one by itself as one package.
Okay, so this would be presented as one, and they would vote yes or no on it as a complete package? Sorry, I'm
So the
making sure
first
I'm
meeting,
understanding.
when I bring it back to them, I'm going to ask them what would they like to do with it.
Okay.
Will they agree to go ahead and schedule the transmittal hearings?
Okay.
And then if they agree with that, then we'll schedule those hearings, have to be advertised, or public hearings, and we'll have these amendments brought before commission and the council through that public hearing process.
And that's when, if there are things that people oppose, or that's when they would speak up and things would get changed from there? Okay.
Public hearings, that's when that evidence will be brought.
Member Rogers.
Technically, I'm an alternate, but yeah, I actually have to say that I think Mr. Parrish's suggestion is probably not a bad one. That I think if we were individually to kind of hash out what our concerns are, and then maybe if he keeps a record of that and we keep a record of that, so we can just basically kind of say here, well, I had a concern about the trees, and so I suggested this, and he said that, and, so I'm satisfied with, this answer, then maybe we can hurry that through. And then if somebody says, well, hold on, wait a minute, then maybe we can, but I mean, we can kind of cherry pick what we really feel like we need to bring up. I do think that might streamline the process. It's not what we're probably typically used to doing, but this is a pretty chewy sort of document, and I think that's a reasonable approach. My 2 cents.
Okay, there are no further questions. Brad, are we satisfied with everything that happened tonight? And
I've received good questions and input and comments that would be helpful for us, so we'll have to digest that and you'll see more. But I would like to reach out to all of you after the meeting.
Okay. Next item is the semi-annual report. That was put on to tonight's agenda because the cart came before the horse. The council had approved our semi-annual report and we hadn't even looked at it. So do you have any questions on that? What did you say, Member Faison?
I was joking. I said I move that we go ahead and approve tonight's semi-annual report since council's already done it. But I was just joking.
No, I don't think that is a joke. I take that as a motion. Is there a second?
Actually, I did have one comment before.
Okay, Member Rogers?
I was just going to say that I appreciated being provided with that information. I know that recently there was maybe a feeling that on one issue we had not been listened to. But it seems to me, just looking at the scorecard here, you know, that actually they do tend to kind of follow what we suggest. And so I felt a little bit more like we were not laboring in vain. But I did notice, as Member Faison has suggested before, that it sure does seem like, you know, if you kind of added up like the yeses and the nos, we do tend to say yes to a lot of stuff. So perhaps we should maybe say maybe or maybe say no a little more occasionally. But I just kind of like to see the score, and it made me feel like, you know, we're accomplishing something here.
Any other comments? Does everybody agree to the semi-annual report? I don't think we have to vote on it.
Yeah, I defer to city council.
Okay.
I do have one question about it. Is the length of information on here useful to the commission?
Yes.
We've been doing this, okay. All right.
Yes, I think so. Okay. City staff report.
At the next city council meeting, we will have a presentation on inclusionary housing and linkage fees. And we will, at the request of council members, they asked us to give them some research and a presentation and background on what the state law allows local communities to do related to that topic. It'll be at 5:30, and then we have an action item asking us to on the regular meeting to decide what they would like us to do with that. And the first step really is, if they tell us to go forward, is to do a affordable housing study. And then that study would help us determine what the issue is, what the needs are, and how to resolve that, possibly using these one or both of these tools. And then what that fee would be, what that program would be. And then also we have the Live Local Act ordinance, already mentioned, scheduled for the first hearing on the 26th of September, the city's response to how to implement that law. And then it'll come to Planning Zoning Commission on the 4th, and then the final hearing to City Council on the 10th of October. And then finally, we do have a draft of the accessory dwelling unit ordinance, and that will come before you soon.
Okay.
And I wanted to ask, I think, Mr. Richardson, you had asked if it'd be possible to see it before it gets advertised? Is that, because otherwise it will be
I didn't
advertised
say
and you'll
that.
see it. Okay.
But I think we need time to consider it. If we don't recommend approval at the first meeting, we need time to look at it, make sure, you know, it contains all the things we intended it to do.
What we possibly could do, I mean, I could bring it back to you so you can see it before it gets advertised. Because typically once it's advertised, if you want to make changes to it, that will be different from how it's advertised. Then you got to re-advertise and go through the whole process again. So I can bring this back to you just so you can see the version that we've come up with before we go forward to City Council.
At the next meeting?
We can do that.
Okay.
All right. That's all I have.
I have a question for you, Brad. When you do your survey, your affordable housing survey needs, can I ask for you to do something that's probably a little bit out of the scope of that, but still within the realm of that survey. It's the City of Titusville has a first-time homebuyers program. So the question that I have, of the people that receive the first-time homebuyers program, how beneficial would it be for them that if the city provides them a first-time homebuyers grant, that the city says that this individual doesn't pay property tax? Would that put homes in today's market value in their price range by not paying property tax?
I think I may need to talk to you more about that after this meeting.
Okay.
Yeah, but I mean, yeah, I'll have to talk to you about that one.
Okay.
Member Rogers.
I just wondered if I could get a definition on linkage and inclusionary housing.
Inclusionary housing or inclusionary zoning is the idea that when a new development comes in, of new residential development, that they have to set aside a certain percent of the units they're proposing for affordable housing. How that's made up, programming, set documents to restrict that, that's all, we have to develop that. The other linkage fee is an impact fee, basically, on new development that they pay into this fund. And so, but all that has to be, there has to be some rational basis of how we develop that, that's contextual to a Titusville. So that the first step really is to do a research on that.
Okay, City Attorney, are you there?
I am here. I am present. I don't have anything further other than to apologize for not being able to be present for the training earlier today. I hope you all were able to receive that update prior to 4 o'clock today.
Oh, yeah.
If you would like to go ahead and move forward with scheduling it for the next meeting on October 4th, I'm good with that.
Well, Brad, how many items are on the agenda for the October 4th?
I'm only familiar with a couple of items at this point.
Is everybody okay with October 4th at 4 o'clock?
I was going to report, due to a planned vacation, I'll be out of state, so I won't be in attendance October 4th. To answer your question, if it's presented October 4th, I won't be present.
I'll take your spot.
Thank you.
Yes, October 4th can be scheduled. Any more reports?
Nothing further for me, thank you.
Okay. How's the daughter?
She's sleeping upstairs.
She's not paying attention to all this?
Okay. Under Chairperson's report, I think it was the last meeting, because it's almost a month since we met last. I resigned, I gave you notification of resigning from the Affordable Housing Committee of the city. I was the P&Z representative on that for 3 years, and I attended almost every meeting. I might have missed one in 3 years. Their main time frame is July to December. Otherwise, you don't meet in January and June to June. It's a crunch time. And I asked if anyone would like to replace me. It is meeting at 3 o'clock every other Monday till the plan is done. And it usually is presented to council at the first meeting of December. Who would like to replace me?
I thought Mr. Faison volunteered.
We volunteered.
Look at everybody back up.
Well, I mean, so.
No, we want the public to hear this. Turn on your mic.
Oh, man. I may not be able to replace him.
Okay.
No. I'm in the middle of doing something right now.
Anyone else
I may not be able to replace him. Conflict of
volunteer to
interest.
take my place?
I have an interest in it, I have to say, but unfortunately, I'm working in Orlando these days, and 3 o'clock is kind of when I get off, and then I've got an hour to get back, so.
So that sounds like Mr. Grant should be doing it? Is that what I heard you just say?
I see Member Moscoso's light up. I guess you're volunteering.
It was just to pass out candy bars.
Just so you know, if this still has to be approved by city council to be onto that committee.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's why we need to do it tonight.
Okay, so I have a question. I'm actually in the middle of starting a nonprofit right now that does first-time homebuyers programs. I am smack dab in the middle of starting that. Hence, that's why it may be a conflict of interest. I don't know. But if I can have a nonprofit that is looking to get a grant from the city to do its first-time homebuyers program and sit on affordable housing, then I can, but I don't think I can do both.
Okay.
Well,
we've
fortunately, we have an
established-
attorney on call right now.
We've established that you're unavailable starting at 3:00 meetings, so are you. And you're going on vacation.
It's my nap time, I can't do it.
What is your excuse?
I have a job.
My nap time.
Member Perez?
My Mondays are incredible.
And yours?
My kids get out of school at 3. Yeah, that's true.
We could, okay, so we can.
You
move
can't
forward.
quit. That's the answer.
We can move me forward as an applicant, but there may be a conflict of interest, that's all. So,
But you're willing to get off work about 2:00
yes,
to be at the social service center, or they call it Harity Moore Center, at 3:00.
yes.
Okay. Is there a motion to approve Member Faison?
Yes.
Is there a second? All in favor?
Yay.
All opposed?
And Chelsea can let him know if there's a.
You're it.
You're it.
So this will be voted on by council next week, right?
I can't confirm that. All I know is that there's an application you have to complete, and then it'll have to go on to the city council's agenda. So the city clerk would determine when that would happen.
I don't seriously think they have a quorum. Because at the last meeting I was at, I was the only member there. And if they're serious about passing that to get to council in December, they gotta attend the meetings.
Coco?
What?
Like one that was in Coco Village?
No, well, yeah. So, we decided this member facing. Any other members report? Your light's still on.
Yeah, I do
Okay,
have,
okay.
I'll make this short, but I was at a meeting, I don't know, maybe back in May, and Member Rogers, they were talking about clear cutting, and you said something about, I'm like mad about it. What do we do about it? And it was just kind of thrown out there. And so I don't know if you've seen, but on South Park, they have, not South Park, Park Avenue, sorry. It's getting late. There's a new subdivision going, and there's been a lot of burning. My kids go to school at Park Avenue, and so there's been a lot of burning on site. So I just wanted to give a shout out to Paul Anderson, who's our fire marshal, because I emailed today and just asked about what are the policies, and he told me that they did have a permit and that it was revoked because they weren't following along with the, I guess, within the guidelines. And so I took that as it's really good to see that it's when citizens do call, because I wasn't the only one, when citizens do call, that things are being done. And so I really appreciated knowing that. And not only did he say that, but he kind of walked me through the process of how that works. And so, I don't know, I think that's a win for our city that there are people following up. And I think we know that, but to see that in action and just to get an immediate response, I just want to commend him for doing that. So.
Yeah, to that concern also, I've received a lot of calls about that. And there's some people have told me they didn't follow the site plan. the clear cutting is extensive. So we need to make sure they're following the site plan. They committed to performing a low-impact development.
Yeah, I had a friend who called me about that. Say, what's going on over there? Why are they tearing down all the trees? I said, well, we have a low-impact development here. They shouldn't be doing that. But apparently we're doing it anyway. Why?
Well, there shouldn't at least be, if you see any burning, there should be, their fire permit has been revoked. So there should be no more burning on site. So that's, I think, a good thing for, I think, the public to know that when you see something like that, to make a call and that it is addressed, and I really appreciated that.
So they may have to be able to get a new permit if they follow the rules. So whatever the issue was, whatever the violation was, they may be able to resubmit and get another permit issued.
Okay.
That's possible. As far as clearing land, we'll check and inspect to see if they're following the clearing permit or the clearing of the areas that are appropriate and that were approved per the site plan. So we'll verify that. But yes, there may be swaths of the property that's going to be cleared in order to do the small lot subdivisions and the stormwater ponds that they're proposing to do. So that may be what you're seeing as well, but we'll verify.
Yes, plus developments that submit site plans have a change in ownership sometimes. And so they don't follow everything that was committed by the previous owner.
Is that legal?
I think it is. But they've got to follow the plan. Mr. Rogers.
It would be nice. I was actually driving by. For some reason, what is the name of the subdivision we were talking about out there?
Avenue.
What's
Park
that?
Avenue subdivision.
No, sorry. The one by the causeway. Going to
Tranquility.
Tranquility.
Thank you. I was driving by there today on the way in here, and it just reminded me of what they had done and what I'd said, actually, and I was thinking, that's the cost of doing business for a lot of those guys. They just basically say, well, we'll get $100,000 fine. I mean, no big deal. I mean, this is a multi-million-dollar thing, and, it's just the cost of doing business. But it would be nice if we could maybe do something to make it hurt a little more if somebody just flagrantly violates the rules. And, because, $1,000 or something, that's a slap on the wrist. I mean, 100,000 is a slap on the wrist to some of those folks.
Are you referring to any particular violation you observed with the Tranquility development?
It came up in this meeting. I did not observe this, but it came up in this meeting that there was a lot of cutting and clear cutting of trees that had not been approved at Tranquility. And that was said, I believe, by one of the members. Although I do not remember which member.
Member Moscoso.
Yeah, Brad, so if for this development off of Park Avenue, say their permit was revoked, why would the city give them another permit to continue to burn is that how it works?
I don't have an answer to that. That's a question for Paul. So sometimes you can remedy an issue. So sometimes, I'll give you an example. There was one development, not a fire, it wasn't a burn permit, but it was the fact that they were doing construction and they didn't have like a fire suppression system or a program in place yet. Mm-hmm. And so they had all this wooden structures, and everything on that property, and they had to stop until that was resolved. So that's the issue. Sometimes they get violation, they'll stop work until the issues are resolved, and then they can continue. So that's probably what might happen here. I don't think, I can't assume that because they had a violation of a fire burn permit or a burn permit and then it was revoked, that they can't get another one. And they have to use some other option. I don't know. I can't answer that.
Thank you.
Anything else? This meeting is adjourned at 9:09.